just for camera's sake, we'll then have other people join us as they arrive. Yes, I know my professional colleagues, journalists, would like to be behind the scenes. Is understandable. Thank you. All right. I'd like to also welcome all of us once again for showing up this morning greatly. We'll begin all of our event with the rendition of our national anthem. Please, can I urge that we please be upstanding as we start.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians home and proud to serve our sovereign motherland.
Thank you so much. Please do have your seat. Let me, just before we go fully into today's event, let me recognize the presence of our leaders here present. We have with us the President and Chairman of Council, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Engineer Leye Kupoluyi. Let's put our hands together for the President. Thank you, sir. With us this morning also is the immediate past President of the Chamber, Mr. Gabriel Idahosa, FCA. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for coming. We have with us also the President and Chairman of Council of the Chartered Institute of Directors, Prince Adetunji Oyebanji. Let's put hands together for him. Thank you, sir. Thank you for showing up. With us also we have a brother and one of the council members here present, Dr. Ayotunde Koka. Let's put hands together for him. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Also, we have the Ambassador Kola Aderibigbe, a Vice President here at LCCI. Please, let's put hands together for him. Thank you, sir, Ambassador, for coming. Also, we have the Deputy Treasurer of the Chamber, Mrs. Adeyegbe. Let's put hands together for her. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for coming. Okay, so we'll go fully into what it is. Many of our leaders will still join us in the course of the day. We'd like to have the welcome address by the President and Chair of Council, Engineer Leye Kupoluyi. Let's welcome Engineer Leye Kupoluyi.
Good morning, all. I know the weather has been cold, especially in Nigeria for a while, and whereas some people who used to have snow on daily basis, they are crying out that the weather is too hot for them. We are experiencing what they are experiencing, and we believe when the weather is cold, possibly the brain works better. And I believe because the weather is cold here today, our discussion may be able to circulate around, but at the same time, I hope nobody will slip off. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate you all for being here. The protocol has been said, but by our tradition here, when you are lucky to have an immediate past president in your presence to be here, you know how important it is for this day. Mr. Idahosa, thank you for finding time to be here. And our both member of the ESCO that are here, that is Dr. Oyebanji. Actually, it's Dr. Oyebanji. He would rather take the prince. Dr. Oyebanji, thank you, a member of ESCO and chairman and president of IOD. Thank you, sir. Today is a day of doctors. Dr. Ayotunde Koka. Thank you, sir. And all the members of ESCO that are here, and many of our chairmen that are here, we say thank you. But more importantly, those who are carrying the day, the people that we'll be listening to. Another Dr. Ayo Teriba. I think he's online. He's supposed to be here, but it seems that, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I know you are there. If we can, yeah, if we cannot see you, we can hear your voice.
Yes, it's me.
Thank you, Dr. Ayo Teriba. We know why you are there. You are there because of what we have been advocating for many years, that there must be collaboration between us and government. And
Thank you.
Our government has recognized that. We thank God that most of the people that are supposed to be here, they are under the same roof with you. Dr. Ayo Teriba, thank you for always finding time. Although it's part of your project that you are here, you've been in the chamber, and today you are for the whole nation, not for the chamber alone. Thank you very much, Dr. Ayo Teriba.
Thank you, my president.
Yeah, we are expecting the special advisor to government on economic affairs already in Lagos. When he's here, we'll be able to recognize him. That's Dr. Tope Fashua. He will be here in a moment. Dr. Muda Yusuf is on his way. He will be here too in a moment. And so many other doctors that are on call here today, including our professor, who is on his way too. I don't know whether it's there online. That is Professor Abiodun Adedipe. He's the founder of B. Adedipe Associate and the chairman of the Economic and Statistics Committee. On his auspices, we're doing this. Thank you, Professor. If you're online, you'll be hearing me. And the Chief Economist.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. It's your day that we are here. And the Chief Economist of First Bank, it seems most people are online, Ms. Chinkwe Igwe, will be part of this discussion today. Thank you. I think our moderators here now. That's Mr. Olu Eson of West African Energy. Thank you. As I've said, many of our people are under the same roof doing this thing that we ask them to do with the federal government in the Ministry of Finance. It is a great pleasure that I welcome you all to this LCCI 2026 Mid-Year Economic Review and Outlook Conference. The annual gathering remains one of the most respectable platforms in Nigeria for rigorous economic dialogue, evidence-based policy engagement, and forward-looking conversation about our nation's economic future. Your presence today is deep affirmation of the private sector commitment to the shaping Nigerian growth trajectory, not as a spectator, but as an active partner in national development and discourse. In the face of rising uncertainty, supply chain disruption, tariff war, geopolitical tension, frustration in oil prices, and the threat of food scarcity crisis, and business community need for economic intelligence and industry insight to inform decision and to take action. We are meeting today at a defining moment. The year 2026 has a means trend across reform, resilience, and ongoing reform. The past few years have tested household, businesses, and institutions alike. Yet, history teaches us that economy do not transform in a moment of comfort, but in a period of challenges, difficult choices are made, reform are sustained, and confidence are deliberately rebuilt. We are quite fortunate to have the breed of speaker here today to look at the various topics on the economy. I'm simply welcoming you, the participants, and allow them to take their turn and give all their professional presentation as always. As I've said, very soon I will join you there to listen to them. I'm ready to take my note. It's always more of a lecture for the next 6 months. And when we implement it, we are sure that we will never make mistake. They are experts, and that is why they are very scarce commodity in the market. Federal government now realizes it, and that's why many of them are talking from Abuja. They never knew that we would be in Abuja. This one was before them. But anyway, that is what we advocated for. LCCI remain unwavering in the belief that sustainable economic growth must be private sector led, productivity driven, and people centered. In line of this conviction, our advocacy will continue to prioritize improvement of ease of doing business and regulatory efficiency, and strengthening the macro, small, and medium-scale enterprises as a critical engine of employment, innovation, and inclusion. The enhancement of trade facilitation, logistic and industrial competitiveness, and the promotion of digital transformation skill, development, and innovation. As we commence today's deliberation, I encourage all to engage boldly, think strategically, and act collaboratively. Nigeria's economic future will not be determined solely by policy, but by quality of partnership among government and business society. I'm sure I'm seeing a doctor, and I know the doctor I'm seeing is Tokwe, and I know that doctor is Fashion, and I know it's another doctor I thought would be in Abuja. I never knew he sent the other doctor to Abuja for him to be in Lagos. Dr. Tokwe Fashion, you are welcome here. You know, it was a surprise that we are here, but we are fully welcome that you are here. We thought you are one of those conquerors that took our people to Abuja. Thank you for being here again. Thank you, my brother. On behalf of the council and member of the chamber, I thank you all for your presence, your commitment, your confidence in Nigerian future. I hereby declare the LCCI 2026 Mid-Year Economy Review Outlook Conference officially open. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for declaring this year's Mid-Year Economic Outlook open. The day is now set for our experts to lead us through to the event of today. Let me specially recognize the presence of the Special Advisor to the President of Federal Republic of Nigeria on Economic Affairs, my brother, Dr. Tokwe Fashion, who came in when the President was making his speech. All right? Our first speaker today, Dr. Ayo Teriba, CEO Economic Associate, is online. So we'll patiently listen to him as we bring up Dr. Ayo Teriba for his own session now. Dr. Ayo Teriba, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Very well, sir. We can.
Thank you very much. I have the floor. Okay. Mr. President, thank you very much for your introduction, for the recognition, and for the invitation. members of council, and members of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce, very distinguished speakers, invited guests, media, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I thank you very much, for this opportunity to be a part of this media conversation. And I want to still, on this same note of gratitude, say that 6 months ago, 15th of January, I was similarly here, as the lead speaker, when we were anticipating the release of the inflation for the month of December. It came at 4 p.m. while we had started our deliberations at 11 a.m., 12 noon. Today is the same. By 4 p.m. today, MBS will release the inflation figures for June. Maybe we should be doing these on the 16th so that the inflation figure would have been released before we assess either the outlook at the beginning of the year or at the mid-year. Nonetheless, based on the facts that we have up to date, I will provide, I'm hoping that I can speak for no more than 10 minutes so that we can give time and opportunity for the wise people we have gathered so that they too can have their say. Well, I'm grateful, to the government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for giving opportunity to one of our speakers at the January event, who then was the chairman of the tax committee, who is now the Minister of Finance and the coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Taiwo Yedele. You remember, I was online on that day. He had come from the summit, and he was here physically. Dr. Tokbe Fashua had joined us online in January, but he's here physically today. So Taiwo has now joined the ranks of Dr. Tokbe Fashua. And having taken the saddle 3 months ago, he has now put together a ministerial advisory committee which has the vice chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group as the chair, and I, been in the council of the chamber, and I'd also been chairman of the Economics and Statistics Committee of this chamber for maybe a total of a decade. I am the vice chair, and we have the president of Nigerian Economic Society, the president of NASIMA, the DG LCCI, the DG MAN, among the members. So what I am hinting at is that far from we, being on the outside and calling on the government, hoping that they will listen, between the beginning of the year outlook and this mid-year outlook, a growing number of those of us that had usually been repeated speakers here now have now joined the ranks of the likes of Dr. Fashua. Mr. Odele is now a minister and is the coordinating minister for the economy. And he has enlisted, about 16, other prominent private sector people as advisor. Nothing that I say this morning should be regarded as being the view of that advisory committee or as that of the ministry. So I want to put that disclaimer. They are my personal views, and they are views that I'm happy to express. I will be speaking on 4 points that will be very easy for us to remember. The first point is that when I addressed us in January, I had reviewed key economic outcomes that have moved in desirable directions. So the first thing I'll be talking about are the main economic outcomes. Are they still moving in the desirable directions, or are they moving in undesirable direction as we have been accustomed to over the decades? That's the first point. The second point that I will speak about are the likely shocks that are likely to hit us. We have all, since our meeting in January, we've watched the United States of America shell Iran, killed the leader and bombed their, military infrastructure, their, Navy. The president of US boasts that their Navy fleet is under the sea. They've destroyed all their military command and control facilities, whether air, land, or whatever. And that had led to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz since the last day of February. And that had led to escalated oil price. So what more shocks are in the horizon in the later half of this year? Will there be ceasefire in Iran, Iraq? Will things continue to escalate? That's global shock. On the continent, while our leaders have been meeting in Kigali, in Kenya, trying to integrate, anti-migrants had been driving other nationals out of South Africa. Military coups have been happening. The Sahel is taking over. Terrorists, phobia. So I would say that on those first 2 points, the outcome had continued to be positive. The foreign reserves keeps growing. The exchange rate remains stable, unprecedented in the last 40 years in this country. You see 6 months in which the exchange rate has done nothing but appreciate. Inflation had declined up to December last year, and from December to May, 6 months, it has stayed at 15 point something percent. That too is tranquil. So reserves, exchange rate, inflation have continued to move in desired directions. GDP growth, the last we measured, showed an acceleration. So inflation stands still, growth accelerating, are all desirable economic outcomes that the reform of the government had brought about, and we should commend them for it. Since we met in January, the stock market, we celebrated 100 trillion on the 5th of January. By May, it had risen to 162 trillion before a post-dividend adjustment and changes of rule made it to retreat to about 140, and it has started rising again. So within January and now, market capitalization has grown by more than 50%. That's an outcome moving in desirable direction. But still, I regret that if this was communist China, about 40% of that increase in market capitalization would accrue directly into government coffers. If this was India, if this was Saudi Arabia, government will sit on at least 30% of that growth in market capitalization. In Nigeria, unfortunately, we have no state-owned stocks listed on the foreign on the stock market. So we miss out on that increased income. If we had been there, if we had been like China and we could sit on 30% of the 63 trillion that accrued from January to May, that would offset about 24 billion out of the president's efforts to try and reach 29 billion in debt. So I do not know if the president and his team will become persuaded in the second half of the year to list state-owned companies in the stock market. Like we have the discos, we still own 40% in those discos. What are those 40% worth? We don't know. The only thing we know is what the depth of that we owe the discos are worth. Let's also know what we own is worth. Let's list them in the stock market. So that by the time we meet in January, we can still count how much market capitalization has grown, and we can then congratulate the government for joining the ranks of Saudi Arabia, India, and China for letting about 30 to 40% of the increase in market capitalization accrue to the government. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's a win-win. Let's put NNPC in the stock market. We know that private companies are saying they are going to list in the stock market. But what we hear from NNPC is that even the refineries will not be listed. You know, or the NNPC itself will not be listed. Let's list in the stock market. So basically, I'm saying that the outcome continues to be positive, and that the outlook of the shock is such that, yes, there are, you know, potential good news on the horizon, there are potential bad news on the horizon. Let's hope that as we escaped in the first half of the year, that in spite of the war, all these economic outcomes remain resilient to the consequences of the shock. Let's hope that outcomes will remain positive in the second half. Shocks will remain muted. And I can go to the last 2 points of my advisory committee yesterday. Said we should provide analysis on how government efforts will land on Alaba market, how they will land in factories of members of this chamber, how they will land in the shops of members of this chamber. So my third concern is about how do we capture those impacts. So I am putting together a report and backed by positive outcomes, these positive reform efforts. How are they landing on states? So I will, in the next 1 or 2 weeks, put out there measures of how states' ranking are changing. Who is getting more internally generated revenue over the last 3 years since President Tinubu came, and the latest available IGR figure. Who is increasing? How are the states ranking? Then if you break the internally generated revenue down to tax and non-tax revenue, who is generating more non-tax revenue? In other words, who is exploiting revenue from assets more? I would hint you that Enugu State, who had an internally generated revenue of 22 billion in 2022, reported an IGR of 406 billion in 2025, was from taxes. 356 billion were from non-tax revenue, which is income generated from state assets owned by the states, which the states had always owned. So how did they find 356 billion naira in this time of hardship? So how that is ranking on exploiting revenue from assets? It doesn't hurt anybody. The presumption that government revenue is equal to tax is misleading. Government revenue does not have to be taxed. Dubai does not tax anybody's income. Saudi doesn't tax anybody's income. They all generate revenue from assets, and they generate much more, than those who try to generate revenue from taxes. I'm not speaking on behalf of government or the committee about tax versus non-tax. This is my own personal advocacy, that Nigeria and the states can generate a lot more from assets. And it's a win-win situation. Let investors, activate all our lives be better. So that's first, our states getting better. Second, our sectors getting better. So I'm also going to, in addition to a rank of the 36 states, present a ranking of the 46 sectors. Their growth between 2023 and now, whose growth has accelerated more. Then I will then jump from sectors to companies, the top 50 companies on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Who is contributing more to the GDP versus who is contributing more to market cap, and finally, I'll be providing us with about 4 measures of how the standard of living of Nigerians, the quality of life of Nigerians have improved across the 36 states, so we are talking about impact, not in theory. We want to measure how these things are landing on states, landing on sectors, landing on companies, and landing on citizens. And finally, on the note of outlook, in the second half of the year, will the stock market gallop from where it is now, maybe to double before the end of the year? Presumably, I'm hoping that will be the reality. Will the GDP growth accelerate from 4 to 6 or to 7 as the president desires? It's all within our reach. If the stock market is unlocking liquidity, that liquidity will fund growth opportunities. So even 10% GDP growth is feasible. I want to leave it there. We can have more to say when we get to questions, and answers to discussion, but I want to yield the floor to the likes of Dr. Tokbe Fashua and all the other wise people that we have gathered from KPMG, from Accenture, and Dr. Biodun Adedipe, and the rest of us. I thank you very much for the opportunity that I've been offered to lead this conversation. And I wish us a very fruitful deliberation for the rest of the session. Mr. President, members of council, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayo Teriba. Thank you for the opening session that you have. Like you rightly observed, we have powerful men and women in-house this morning. Let me recognize one of the powerful men who just joined us in the course of this event. Please put your hands together for Dr. Muda Yusuf. Dr. Muda Yusuf was the DG of this chamber before. Today, is the CEO of Center CPPE, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. Once again, let's clap for Dr. Muda. When you have Dr. Muda in a room, you can be sure that you just need to get your biro and your papers ready. Your pen, your paper. Your paper will be very full. Thank you, Dr. Muda, for doing your best. All right, so we'd like to have the special advisor to the president on economic affairs. He's here with us always. He has always been with us all of these events. I think he was here with us in January, if I'm not missing it. Please put your hands together for our brother, Dr. Tokwe Fashua, for his session. Yes. Let's display his presentation.
All right. Yeah, I'm good. Good morning, President, LCCI, members of council, distinguished speakers here present, ladies and gentlemen. So I've been asked to put together a paper. I hope, yeah, thank you very much. So basically, well, I was asked to actually review 3 key sectors, notably agriculture, manufacturing, and services. But trust me, what I decided to do towards the end of the presentation is to look at whole of economy. And I thank you for inviting me once again to come and make my presentation and projection So kindly just shoot. How much time do I have? I always like to ask. 20 minutes. Okay. I think I'll need a little bit more, but I'll be very quick because I think the slides are many. Can we deal, please? So basically, the first part of the presentation, so I can save some time, has to do with the the general economic outlook so far, and just an overview. Then we look at the impact of the reforms. Then we look at those three key sectors, and we look at the future. In between, I have some infographics which I hope to be able to go through. Okay. Essentially, just to piggyback on what Professor Teriba has also discussed, we know where we are, but I mean, what I'll try to do is to point some key notables as we go along. We know where the GDP growth is at. It's predicted to be 4.1%, hopefully this year in general, even the latest IMF Article 4 report. Also, that same report said that Naira's real value should be around 1,147, which is noteworthy that the Naira is presently undervalued, and I think it's one of the first times we're hearing that in a while. What that means, though, is that we have a certain wiggle room to play with. It used to be that most of the time before we'll hear that the Naira is overvalued and we should devalue. As it is now, if we could revalue, we will. But of course, that market has been left to market forces. But don't be surprised if the Naira would move up to maybe 1,200 as time goes on. Why not if not? But where it is now, we're going to discuss some of the pros and cons of that reform, the reform as it pertains to the Naira. Of course, even I was surprised, but the IMF projects that our reserves should get to 58 billion by the end of this year. That's also another very notable. We're on 51 billion now, already past the target of the central bank. But it seems like there's been something that's shifted in the economy, which is making us accrete reserves more. And of course, we have now seen 12 straight consecutive quarters, meaning 3 years of positive trade balances since President Bola Ahmed Tinubu came. Of course, inflation is still up at 15.9%. Well, not too good. We target single digit, at least 9%. But of course, it's a gradual process. We may have actually started approaching that if the US-Iran war hadn't happened. Because we had already gone up down to 14.4% in November 2025. Of course, in December, there was some adjustments and so on, as Dr. Teriba has already said. There's been improvements also, it could be argued, in real infrastructure stock, roads, primary health center, and so on. I was reading a very interesting report in Business Day, or is it Premium Times, a couple of days back, that actually focused on what we've been able to do in the health sector, and it's very interesting results. This is just the IMF growth forecast for 2026. In spite of the fact that most of the growth in some of these other countries and the major countries in the world has been reviewed downward as a result of the US-Iran war, for Nigeria, they have maintained that 4.1 trajectory, or at least over 4%. Of course, our aim is not to stay around 4%, even though it's over our population growth rate, so we can say we have a marginal real growth rate. Our aim is 6 to 7%, at least in the minimum. And if it was left to me, I'll continue to say that we should be aiming at double-digit growth. And I see no reason why. Even if we were working from a base effect scenario, meaning that, you're coming from a low position when, children grow faster than adults. Nigeria is a 66-year-old country of independence rule. We've been through a lot. I was discussing with some gentlemen in Côte d'Ivoire just last week, over the weekend, and I was challenging them at the African Economics Conference. Why is it that we've never had a Nobel Prize winner in economics in Africa. And it's unfortunate, if not for anything, because we're dealing with a lot more complexity, economic complexity in Africa here than in many parts of the world where they have written about their economy for 200 years, 300-400 years. We have 66 years. We're dealing with the tailwinds of colonialism, if you like. We're dealing with tailwinds of military coups, with insecurity, with instability of all types, and you have to manage the economy through all of that. We're dealing with the fact that our first industrial growth, the first industrial experiment in Nigeria, of course, came with the colonial powers who came and had to establish industries here, maybe to feed their own industries abroad or to bring things down to Nigeria for the local population. We're dealing with that historicity in terms of, how the gradual development, in fact, if you like, the gradual westernization of Africa, and Nigeria being the biggest country in terms of human population in that Africa. So, we didn't know we needed conflicts before. We didn't know we needed all those things, now we have them. And so you look at the psychology that brought that about, the fact that there was a certain transmogrification of our economy and our society at the same time. These are complexities that if someone wrote a consistent paper on that, you should recognize them and give them a Nobel Prize. Because if you look at what some of the other economists have got Nobel Prizes for, they aren't as complicated. If you go and check the Nobel Prize winners in economics over time, and some of the things they've written about are not complex at all. But they happen to. So I'm saying just in general that we are living in serious complexity here. Nigeria, now 220 million people, depending on who you believe. But we are surrounded by Francophone countries. In many parts of Nigeria, at all those borders, nothing separates one country from another. So, and here, brothers and brothers on the other side. This one just happens to be French. This one happens to be Nigeria. British. And so you can walk over. How do we protect those borders? Do you build a fence, like Donald Trump said he will, between America and Mexico at some point in time? Will you be able to do that and separate brothers who worship in the same mosque, in the same churches, speak the exact same language, whether it was Benin Republic and, the Yorubas in Benin Republic. I was in Cotonou for the first time, actually, about 3-4 months ago. And in the hall of 200, 300 people, 80% spoke Yoruba. Well, here we are. So these are complexities we're having to deal with, which we must. We must consider the historicity of our problem. If we don't, we're going to be analyzing and, existing in angst and saying some very extreme things about ourselves, when in actual fact, we're still learning and we're writing history in real time. You say, oh, this country can never be good. What do you know? As a matter of fact, these countries, if you actually put it side by side, some of the other countries that we admire, this country in 66 years, we've done incredibly well. A lot of spaces have transformed. A lot of spaces have transformed in the last 66 years, even in the last 20 years. I was just thinking, flying into town yesterday, I was thinking about Maraba. I was reading an article saying that there's 2 bridges they're doing in Maraba in Abuja, for those who know Abuja a bit well. Now, Maraba is a center of confusion. If you are traveling all the way from Jos, all the way from the north, or wherever it is you are coming from, when you get to Maraba, first when you get to Masaka, there's a place called Masaka. Some of you have never heard that name before. The name sounds scary, Masaka. So if something bad happens in Masaka, you say, oh, why not? In fact, before you get to Masaka, you get to one place called One Man Village. One Man Village, yeah. Imagine, that means there was a time that only one person lived in that place. But all of those places have become urbanized now. But anyway, 2 bridges are coming up in in Maraba. Maraba used to be a clog. But eventually 2 bridges are coming. And I was thinking, okay, how does that bridge change the life of the people in those places? Dr. Teriba had just spoken about one of the missions of the minister's economic council that they inaugurated yesterday. They want to know our policy land. So it used to be that Maraba was a place where you'd have all the vendors selling, pushing things in your face, trying to get into your glass, into your car and all of that. When that bridge comes, they probably will have to relocate elsewhere. That's one thing. But there has to be some positives to doing a bridge in that place. Because again, when we talk about our multidimensional poverty, we talk about 130 million people are living in multidimensional poverty, which actually is non-income poverty, which actually deals with the availability and closeness to infrastructure. That's what we talk about, okay? And so when we have infrastructure, it should have direct impact on reducing that multidimensional poverty. And so I believe that the multidimensional poverty of those living around that area should reduce as a result of that bridge. But we can continue to analyze on and on how that bridge or those two bridges are going to totally transform that area. Nigeria is transforming. Maybe if you are not in the construction field, or you didn't get the contract, or you didn't supply the sand or the bitumen or whatever, you may actually be totally on the outside and say, oh, nothing is happening in this country. But for those people for whom those bridges are happening, apart from the fact that you can now get across that and save 30 minutes of your journey coming from Jos or from wherever, you save actually 30 minutes get spent in Maraba Junction alone. So whatever that translates to in terms of maybe you can now get 30 minutes more sleep in your house after your travel, how do we quantify that? And those are the things we should begin to think about. But remember, this country has transformed, maybe not as quickly as it could. Professor Teriba mentioned the Chinese example and all of that. That's not our history, though. It will be good to be able to do some things by draconian laws, maybe the way the Chinese have done over time, but that's not our history. But this is our history, and we must make the most of this, our history. Okay, that said, so Greek manufacturing and services, between these three, they control 87% of the economy. It's almost the whole thing. However, I want us to note that services, of course, dominate into the future. In fact, with the new push from artificial intelligence and so on, it is now predicted that service will even take even more, chunk, a bigger chunk of the economy will be taken over by service. Okay, that's the thing. We would have even service taking more of the chunk, because we have started to see how companies, especially the big tech companies, some of them have laid off about 200, 300,000 people in the last 2 months. Okay, and it's coming here. Even old people like me are learning artificial intelligence. I've learned Claude, I've learned ChatGPT, I've learned Gemini. I'm a little bit proficient with it now. And it can be learned by anyone. As a matter of fact, I did mine on just Cursive, without the Cursive, $20, $30, plus another $60 to get some of the apps. And when you learn artificial intelligence as a CEO, you begin to look at some of your staff and say, what am I doing with this guy again? Because those reviews that you want to do on the document can be quickly done by yourself. Just upload it and boom. What will take a human being a month to do, you get it done in 5 seconds. Anyhow, but so what's the future? And again, that's another thing we need to take cognizance of when analyzing our economy. Remember, we don't live in a silo. We're not in a silo here. We're not on our own. What happens in the rest of the world has direct impact. In fact, we need to begin to analyze the economy beyond maybe some of the geopolitical risk. Is U.S. bombing Iran? When are they going to stop the war? This is another aspect that we must look at the economy from. That, listen, whatever is happening in the rest of the world is having impact here directly. So service will continue to dominate, it is said. Because one thing that artificial intelligence may not be able to do is that human touch, where you need human touch. I went to China in 2024. For the first time, I saw that robot that serves food. He will come to your room. It will climb, it will get in the lift itself and go to your room and get to your door and they serve you and all. Maybe they don't want to use a human being for that. But there's still things that human beings will continue to look out for and to do. Apart from that, artificial intelligence cannot do your plumbing. It can't be an electrician, per se. Okay? It can't do the tiling of this room. At least not for now. But it may get there, it may be able to tile. But it's going to be a lot of work. At least not artificial intelligence. Maybe robotics can do that. Anyhow, so that's that. And then, of course, there's a new impetus to industrialize. There's a March report by the World Bank, the 17th of March. The World Bank released a report and said it is now okay for countries to industrialize. And the Wall Street Journal, among others, took them up and said, but for 30 years, 40 years, you told African countries that there's no need to industrialize. It was the Wall Street Journal that took them up, not me. In the SAP years, they say, you know what, we deindustrialized. So the few industries we had post-1960, by 1985, 86, 87, they were closing down and leaving. But not only because of the advice of the IMF and World Bank. It was also the time when globalization was being interpreted. And many of those companies realized that, look, they could go to China for cheap labor. And so they were closing down not only in Nigeria, also in many of the Western countries, moving to China for the cheap labor. But eventually they realized that it was a mistake. Now they're trying to run back. But the World Bank, and maybe the reason the World Bank says, it is okay to industrialize. That in fact, for all the countries that they survey, they realized that there was one industrial policy or the other, and they support it. So it's left to Nigeria. We can't trade our way out of this. This is the reason I came here. LCCI is not a gathering of traders. It's a gathering of industrialists, I believe. Okay, of course there'll be traders amongst you, but also industrialists, people who create real things. One of the most difficult things to do is to run a factory from morning to evening. The number of moving targets, moving objects and different things, and you're having to model human behavior, trying to prevent people stealing your wares, stealing from your warehouses, your suppliers, your machines. It's incredibly difficult. So I have great respect for anyone in that field. Please give yourselves a round of applause. So anyhow, agri-mechanization is on the upsurge, and also locally, I believe, even though LCCI may disagree with me, I believe that there's been an upsurge of local small companies providing for the things that we had imported in the past as a result of where the Naira is. And we can see it even in the educational sector alone. British universities are complaining. Some of them are trying to come to Nigeria. Coventry, Birmingham is trying to work with Unilag. King's College London is working with the African Center of Medical Excellence in Abuja, King's College. There's the Charterhouse School, an A-level British school somewhere in Lekki where some of you pay 45 million naira for your children every year for one child. You can do it if you can, why not? At least it's better to have your child here than to keep them in the UK where you can't even go to visit them very quickly. And there's a rugby school. There's a school called the Rugby, I think it's Rugby School, right there in Atlantic City, the Eco Atlantic. You're beginning to see a shift. And that's what they call behavioral. We're also seeing behavioral changes. Nigerians are patronizing local more. We hit an inflection point. This suit on my body was sewn in Nigeria, even though I don't know where the fabric came from. As a matter of fact, when I go abroad now, I don't buy anything. Because, of course, I just do the conversion. I say, what? So, I'm not buying. Even this shoe, I bought it in Nigeria. If we are going to buy it abroad, I'll pay 5 times the cost for it. So what's the point? So that's some of the things that happened. Okay, and I want us to take note of this. I believe strongly, contrary to some of the claims that I've heard made before, including by my friend, the chief economist of NESG, when he said 7 million companies have closed down in Nigeria, I wrote a serious rebuttal. Because if you want to do that, you also have to go to CAC and find out how many new companies have been registered. But we should be careful. I'll say this very quickly. There's a team of the UNDP in Nigeria right now. And what they came to do was to help us with, with how to get prepared for rating agencies. Nigeria has been rated badly for too long. Not only Nigeria, Africa in general. In fact, there's one step of the rating agency where the rating agencies will write up their opinion of a country, then send it to that country. I don't know how they send it, maybe by email, and give 24 hours for the country to revert. I said, if you do that, 100% of the time, that thing will get lost in the bureaucracy in Africa. 100% of the time. Even though the people in Ministry of Finance say, yeah, we managed to answer them one time, maybe last year we were able to do it. 24 hours. So we're trying to get more prepared. But one of the key things that this team mentioned from the UNDP was that many times African countries have been downgraded simply because of one statement from someone that mattered. It could be the OPS, the organized private sector. So the country is dying. Of course. The country is dying. Please put them in junk bond rating. In fact, reduce it by 1 or 2 notches. So I don't know how we're going to do it, how we're going to be a bit more positive about our country. That's part of why I'm saying that this country has changed in significant ways since we started. We make mistakes, but mistakes sometimes are important so that we learn how to do it better. There's a lot of inefficiencies, no doubt. But I think that it will be more positive if we rally around ourselves and do the right thing for ourselves. Anyhow, so this is just 1 or 2 points here. I mentioned about the export growth and trade surpluses before. This has to do with the diversity manufacturing space. There's, in fact, look at that figure, 57.1% of local raw materials has been increasing. They said as a result, actually, of where the rates are, where the exchange rate is. We've seen more local sourcing of raw materials across industries. What else is there? The 7.4 trillion trade surplus, and so on. And then, of course, 3.29%. Q1 2026, there was some spike in manufacturing addition to GDP in that quarter. We hope that that continues to be the case. Okay? So, this is as far as manufacturing is concerned. 3.29, yeah, I think is the same point being made in that for 7.1. Now, this is the services. Of course, services is still the biggest contributor to the economy. Of course, in terms of the categorization of the economy. It keeps on growing, and it's projected to grow even some more. Whether you are talking about fintech, 22.8%, digital economy and cloud adoption, 22%. There seems to be, on the service side, real positive developments for the economy. Okay, so let's look at the reforms. The reforms, of course, there are so many reforms. Usually we focus on petroleum subsidy removal and Naira recalibration, the way I like to put it. We focus on these two. If we like, we add the tax reforms as well. But this has been majorly a reform-minded administration. So we're not talking about petroleum subsidy alone. We're talking about Naira. We're talking about monetary policy reform. 30 trillion that was sitting in the books of central bank as overdraft to federal government was moved properly to be part of the national debt. That's part of the reasons why we have a spike in national debt. It's proper accounting. Okay? 30 trillion was moved. And now we're having better central banking, much more conservative, much less maverick in the approach. Okay? There's also, that's what I mentioned as the debt reform. We have better handle on our debt, accounting now than before. We also have instances of beneficiation of solid minerals, etc. The president opened some lithium factories recently, and we're beginning to insist on adding value. In fact, yesterday, there was another policy which I heard Mr. President said on cocoa that we will now not send any cocoa bean abroad. That's going to be tough, but at least let's try, and beginning to add value. There's also this very interesting reform, I just called it Executive Order 9, which has to do with NNPCs, the crude oil and gas proceed, okay, that Nigeria wants those monies to go directly into the consolidated revenue account as against what happened before. Do you know in 2 months, okay, in 2 months, Nigeria got 500 billion naira into FARC from NNPC as a result of that. As a matter of fact, it's gone to about 7 billion now from I'll get back to that. But the result of that EO9 has been tremendous. Of course, we have the tax reform which has kicked in. Though contrary to what Dr. Teriba said earlier on, it's good to trace what the states are making by IGR, but we have to be nuanced, okay, so that we don't encourage the state. Part of the idea behind the tax reform is to ensure that we don't have instances of multiple taxation. If every state is having to pursue people on non-tax revenue, that may lead to a scenario where they go back to employing all these quote and unquote, thugs and co to be laying trucks and all of that on the road, saying they're looking for money. So we have to be very careful to be able to educate them. Luckily, the minister is the one that put together the tax revenue. Tax reform. I was part of the team. We know that at a point they said in Port Harcourt, someone brought receipt of 170 different fees that they paid as a trucker, just to bring things from Port Harcourt to Lagos. In Kano, I was there in Dawano market. They were telling me that, look, if you are sending grains to Lagos, you have to give each truck driver 500,000 to pay bribes on the road. And that was like 4 or 5 years ago, before even Naira got weaker. Maybe now at least 1 million to give people. So those are the things we want to eradicate, and they are beginning to go right now. They are beginning to go. So customs reforms, we've seen that. In fact, I saw that custom made a target. They said they want to target 40-something trillion. I said, about 4 years ago, custom was just getting to 1 trillion collection. Okay? That's very gladdening to me, because the moment the Naira devalued, I said, okay, yes, custom revenue should go up ×2 because everything they do is based on the dollar, right? But if you are giving me a quantum of about 30 times what you used to collect, that's great. That's efficiency. That means that, they know they're dealing with an accountant. The president is an accountant, an auditor to boot, and so you don't joke with his money. So we're glad that that's happening. There's reform there. I also added this LG autonomy, and you're going to see some pictures now. I'm going to be speeding up so that I can see those pictures, that the LG autonomy is really where it's a reform, and it's already beginning to kick in. Some local governments are getting $1 billion every month, some 1.5 billion, some 2 billion. And so I was on TV with Shehu a few weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, and I did make a statement there. I said, you know what, think about it. Poverty eradication should be a local government function, because that's where people live. So enough, okay, fine, we can say, let's expect policies from Bola Tinubu in federal government, but in order to eradicate poverty with people, local government is very central. Very, very central, because that's where people live. So we must assist the local government to do the right policy with the kind of monies they're getting now, and ensure those things actually land. So for example, what Professor Teriba said, how are the policies landed? How is the local government autonomy policy landing with the people? It should be landing with the people actually getting to see government properly. About 40% of the roads in this country, 40-50% is local government road. So in that your street, if the street is rough and untarred, it's actually a local government function. So we should commend the government for, not me, but at least President Tinubu for doing that local government autonomy, because it actually shifts that responsibility to the, and of course, state policing. I see there's been a bit of, but in everything, truth is that of course, things go slower in a democracy, but they go all the same. It may take time, but it will move eventually. Well, I think personally that we have got to that epoch where we must have state policing, okay? Because, I mean, how many of our children will be kidnapped before we do that? It has now got, as a matter of fact, it's just pure economics for me. Part of the security challenges, most of it, is because we have too many unmanned spaces in Nigeria. Many of the places we go to abroad and we say, wow, it was great to be in Europe, and they have policemen everywhere. The Scandinavian countries have 35% of workers working with government, most of them in security services. When you go to Dubai and you enjoy your whatever time there, most of those people, you see, even taxi drivers are members of CID. You make a mistake, you'll be shocked how quickly the police will appear. So, I mean, we can't be running with 400,000 policemen. Let them be in every state. If every state employed 5,000, 10,000 new policemen, that's addition for me into income being earned by people. That is addition to the GDP. If you look at it from an income side, that is more people on ground. And so it's time. So I also add it as a reform. So you can see there's so many reforms we have had. Now, I have some arguments, and I'm going to just show some evidences, and then I sign off because I'm running off to Abuja this afternoon. No. So with your kind permission. So anyhow, I have some arguments that I'll be making and some evidences to show. Why is this thing blinking and shaking? And shaking and blinking. Okay, so employment across sectors. I mentioned AI efficiency. So we're having a scenario. Okay, yes, I have some evidence to show that I spoke with the MBS, and they sent me the employment across different sectors in Nigeria. I now made my own assumption, and I published it in an article in Premium Times and the Cable as a way of reaching out. I'm going to show that. What that shows to me is that we must, I'm just looking for ways by which I can convince people that, look, hey, the economy may not be dying as you think, okay? But because we live in a social media age, we have a lot of doom scrolling and people saying very big things that they are not quite sure about. And that ties into the ratings that I mentioned, and it ties into the well-being of every Nigerian. Okay, also environment security. Now, I'm of the opinion that yes, the private sector provides employment, fine, but the government, federal, state, and local, also have responsibility, okay? And we have spaces in environmental sector. Look at all the floods in Lagos, people dumping refuse everywhere. We could employ 1 million people in the environmental sector tomorrow in this country, and we'll still have issues. But if we do, they can solve real problems and earn real money. GDP will increase, the environment will get better, whether you're talking of the north where you have desertification or the south where you have flooding and all sorts of things. Security sector, of course, we've mentioned state policing and all of that. That's space there. Some of these may not be bankable. You may not tell the private sector to do it for you, but you can work with the private sector to employ people into this, in this age of business process outsourcing and what have you. Social services. Most of the people, young people who leave this country, they go abroad and do social services. You're taking people who have mental challenges off the street, keeping them in homes, old people and all of that, who are infirm. We also have that problem here. We have that same problem here, many. And so social services is another area where employment can be generated. Why? Because I mentioned that 200, 300,000 people were sacked, okay, in just Google, Amazon, and co. because of, and what they wrote in front of their sack letter was AI efficiency, meaning that AI is getting more efficient, so we don't need you anymore. Okay, so we have this advantage. Also, we need more teachers, we need more people in the healthcare sector. Okay, I wrote about the productive value of the Naira, and in this one I listed some of the key exporters in this country because there was an argument about the real value of the Naira. What is the real value of the Naira? Should it be stronger? Should it be? We spend too much time on that. I focus on the productive value of the Naira, the value that we can get that can make us more productive. I think we're near that point now. The value we can get that will make us import less, export more. Some will argue that we're not importing enough. Fair enough, if we're importing for raw materials, for industries, and machinery, okay? But if we're just importing just for the sake of importing, that's not good enough. Every country is thinking about exporting. And I said, the World Bank said, you guys should go and industrialize now. So why not if not? More funds for states, we've argued that inflation, yes, I said inflation effect is not totally negative. I made an argument about the fact that, we complain a lot about inflation. There was a time when food prices went up 200% in 2023, 2024, which was damaging to majority of Nigerians. But what actually happened around then was that we had middlemen who were buying up food and keeping and hoarding them. Some of them, they call themselves aggregators. Very corporate people. But who was suffering? The average Nigerian. When your rice doubles or triples or quadruples in prices. And that was what made the government say, you know what, if these guys are not going to release this food, let us import a bit. And of course, government imported, we gave, the impetus for people to import things like rice. Prices of food crashed in 2025. Farmers started complaining that you wanted to run them out of business. Okay, the government didn't import every food, only rice and maybe some maize, I think. So, we have to be careful about that. People are complaining about rents increasing in Lagos, which is true, especially in the more urban places in Lagos, especially Island, for those who insist on staying in Lekki, even with the floods. But it is Nigerian people that are the landlords, that are the ones collecting the money. So there's always a debit and credit side to every transaction. Okay? Of course, inflation is bad, it's damaging, but my own concern is exploitation. And the final people who must fight against exploitation are the people of Nigeria themselves. That will soon be done. And of course, yes, this very first one is very important. When I was in Côte d'Ivoire over the weekend, they spoke about African economies. They said that, listen, Africa is sitting on about $4 trillion in terms of assets under management, in pension funds, in banks, in private equity, in different places. But that most of that is just packed in banks because of high interest rates. In Nigeria, we have 26.5% MPR. Many banks can simply just take current account money at 0 interest and pack in treasury bills at 16, 17%. And so the push is we're trying to get those people to actually do proper financial intermediation. I personally think that, yes, there's a dislink between interest rates and inflation in Nigeria at least. So the fact that inflation went down in Nigeria is not only because of where the interest rates were in terms of high interest rates. It may have contributed, okay? But inflation went down as a result of several other things. Even the fact that there was advocacy. Obas were sending Ijoyes to the market to go and talk to those market people. This is where we are as a people. You won't read that in any economic textbook. But it works. We should begin to tell ourselves some truths. That advocacy is part of what worked and made the market people. Otherwise, look, what stops anybody getting to the market today and say, listen, this is what I'm selling my goods. And if people are buying, your neighbor will start to increase his own as well. It's that primitiveness. Okay? So, let's tell ourselves the truth. So, you see that domestic investment, I'm of the opinion that we are always chasing foreign investment and neglecting domestic investors. All these new skyscrapers in VI and in Ikoyi are being built by domestic investors. Very few foreign investors. Of course, we got $1 billion foreign investment in Nigeria in 2025. How much is that compared to the kind of monies that are coming in? What is an investment? Money that you spend with a view to getting more money. So, in fact, anybody that builds a face me, I face you house, takes 3 rooms and rents 7 rooms to other people, it's an investor. So I asked them in MBS, I said, how do you calculate the investment function, the domestic investment function? They said, well, there's from time to time, they do one, there's one survey they do. I said, no, this is not detailed enough. We could be missing something there. I'm of the opinion that domestic investment is what is driving this economy, not foreign investment. Every time We seem now wired to always, having done everything, we blame ourselves for not bringing foreign investment. Are you taking notice of what's right under your nose, the domestic investment? Okay, that's that. So, alternative route to be, let me leave that one. Inflation I've discussed. Can you write off Nigeria in 66 years? I've discussed that one. The debt government rating agencies I've discussed. Cash transfer, I personally, the IMF report also spoke about cash transfer. And they've been encouraging us. I personally don't believe that our economy is at that stage where we should be giving cash to people to spend. It is good if you can give cash to people from government. Maybe the people who are totally down and out, maybe. But I've suggested, to some of the foreign people who come, why aren't you encouraging us to adopt the American strategy? So what they call the food stamp, the SNAP, it's food they give people. So the money you give us to give, you lend us money to give individuals 25,000 in their account or 50,000, whatever. Why don't we use that money, finance our agri sector, expand our agri sector? Like Americans, let our farmers produce much more than we need. Let the government be the off-taker, first up-taker. Okay? And so let people have those vouchers where they can go to the market. We can design all of that and get food rather than cash. Because even imputing cash into the economy with no backing in productivity is inflation. It's inflationary. Okay, so that's my opinion there. And of course, I will close with the fact that the micro sits on the macro. The micro, so when people say the macro economy is what you guys are fixing, oh, yes, we know that the macro is doing well, but look, you see, if you don't build a good macro economy, you cannot have a good macro economy. You can't put something on nothing. The something that you have to, the superstructure, okay, is the macro economy. If you were just giving people money and you haven't fixed, what matters in the economy, you're not taking care of inflation, that means you're just increasing inflation. If the GDP is not growing, you are not supporting manufacturers, you are not supporting MSMEs and co. And you are fixing micro because you are responding to the siren song. Oh, people are complaining, give them money, and you give them money. You are not solving any problem. The microeconomy sits on the macroeconomy. Okay? Of course, there's a timing in terms of knowing when to stop fixing just macro and then focusing on the microeconomy. Anyway, this one is just to mention the recent upgrades that we have had by S&P and Co. And also this very important news, Nigeria's tax revenue surged 49% year on year in the first half of 2026. That's remarkable because we're looking at maybe the tax reforms are beginning to kick in. Okay? And it was driven by fiscal reforms and digitization at the NRS. Okay? Some other notables. Of course, we know about the best performing capital market in the world. Okay? I mean, how much trillion? Dr. Teriba mentioned about 150 trillion now in that market. Okay? Year on year, we've had 50% growth in that market alone. That's out of this world. Okay? Now, I'm not concerned. You can say elites are the ones that play in stock market. Okay, we agree. But where is that money coming from? In the same instance, we did recapitalization of the banks, and over 4 trillion was raised in a very short period of time, and most of that was domestically raised. Again, pointing to the fact that domestic investment, our biggest problem is informalization. We're too informal. Everybody is hiding something. Nigeria is also the second country for the adoption of cryptocurrency after India in the world. And I was talking to the DG of SEC. He said, look, there's some certain $80 billion sitting in cryptocurrency owned by Nigerians. So we cannot, okay, fine. If some of us have that money, let us know that maybe, I wrote an article, I said, is it poverty, inequality, or informality? What exactly is our problem? Poverty exists, but I don't think that's a real problem. Inequality may be a problem. Some people have so much money, and somehow it's in the informal market. And that's the idea behind the tax reform, to see how we can get some back. I'm going to show you a graph now. You see that Nigeria has the second largest informal economy by proportion in Africa after Zimbabwe. It's an embarrassment, given the fact that we have one of the biggest economies in Africa. There's too much what they call on the streets coding going on in this country. We can code ourselves. Okay, so balance of payment surpluses, yes. 2023, you see how a reversal from minus 3.3 billion to 6 to $4 billion, which is great for the economy. Exports are up about 30%, imports down about 30%. I used to analyze Nigeria's import and export profile before I joined government. And our biggest import was petroleum, the one you put in the car, by every means, about 25 billion to 30 billion every year, standard. Most of that has disappeared. Luckily, we have a Dangote. There may be issues with that, but at least we have a Dangote. So that has disappeared. From that 30 billion now, we're probably down to about 5 billion of imports, which is great for us. And on the export side, we used to export, our major export was crude oil, 52 billion. That has reduced as well to about 25, 30 billion because we have some local people to feed with our crude oil, which is good for the economy. 4 car manufacturers in this country, 7 assemblers, capitalization I mentioned. Nigeria has the third highest, I think I mentioned that before, the third highest global number of foreign students in the world after India and China, and those are billion people in terms of 1.4 billion in population. Each of them, Nigeria is just 200 million. How can we be the third highest country for foreign students? Which money are we funding that? Which money are we funding? The bad thing about ours is that most of them don't come back to Nigeria. And you hear many of them are online, slagging off the country and talking about how Nigeria is a useless country. How did we get to that point? So we need to rethink. All I'm just urging a fundamental rethink of the economy. Okay? 12 straight quarters of trade surpluses. I mentioned that before. The MTN story, let me not say that now. I mean, it's a very wonderful story when MTN was coming to Nigeria. I mean, when Nigeria was going to GSM and, Vodafone, the biggest phone company in the world, commissioned one of the top 4 consulting firms in the world and say, give us a study about this country. And they said, they came here and said, no, these ones are too poor. We had only 400,000 Nitel lines then. 400,000 Nitel lines. Multi-links and Intercellular was struggling. They said we can't have more than 1 million phone numbers. 1 million mobile phone numbers. How many do we have now? 138 million. In fact, maybe it's even more than that. It was 200 million plus. They now did an audit. They scraped up some. You give it about 170 million phone number. 170 million. From one, how far off can you be? You said we can't have more than 1 million. You ask yourself, and MTN came, they took that advantage. They've been consolidating. Now they make 40% of their global profit from this country. Not even from South Africa where they're from. 40% consistently for more than 20 years. So don't underrate the Nigerian economy. I mean, last week, the minister, Keyamo, said Nigeria has the largest number of private jets in Africa. Why not, if not? Even a billionaire Dangote complained that he doesn't find a place to park his private jet anymore. So the point is this, so maybe we don't have that, only a debilitating, irreversible poverty problem. Maybe it's an inequality problem. Maybe it's an informality problem. I think it's an informality problem. If we can tackle informality, we'll puncture that thing and the money will get released. And of course, even with our exports, a lot gets exported to the north, through the north, up to Sudan, up to everywhere. Is informal. Is almost unaccounted for. When I went to Dawano, went to Chalawa, went to Sharada in Kano, they told me many times rather than come to Lagos with their goods for export, they go out and go to Ghana. And a lot of the yams in Ghana, a lot of the hibiscus in Ghana that gets exported are Nigerian products. So the size of our economy, we may not be able to even estimate properly. Now, this is what I mentioned before by way of, you see, this is what I got from MBS. That first line, that second column rather, where the first numbers are what they said. I'm going to share this. I've already shared it to LCCI anyway. This is what they have estimated as as employment today across sectors. Crop and animal production, those are farmers, 24 million. I reduced it to 20 million here to say, okay, this is 2023 numbers. Let's assume that we're having less farmers, okay? I reduced it to 20 million. I reduced some of them. Some are increased. Like, what's this one? Manufacture of foods and products because of population, you know. Okay, so down the line, there's food and beverage activities. I included that to 7 million just to take care of population. And so these are people who are in permanent employment, mostly. Okay, plus or minus. Plus some new sectors that are, look, makeup, people are makeup artists in this country. For anybody doing wedding, ask them how much they pay for those makeup. These ladies spend money. Jesus. Sometimes I thank God I'm a man because I don't know what I'll do with myself if I was a woman. I have no patience for those things. But you know, to do a makeup, maybe they charge 200,000. And then you come back from that party and you wash it away. That's the part I don't understand. I asked my wife, I say, this is your makeup why don't you guys just do it permanent? So that you don't just do it permanent. At least do one for 1 year. Okay, you look finer than I know you now. Because I don't get it. You're going out and you're looking like somebody else. And sometimes some women, they don't know this. They see you say, you don't know me again. You say, I can't know you. You're somebody else. You are totally transformed. You say, I don't know you. How will I know you? So every time you do your makeup, know that you are somebody else. And this thing, now, the MBS categorization has no provision for anything like makeup artists. I just put 20,000 in Nigeria. There could be more. There probably will be a lot more. Digital and remote work, there's no provision in the MBS numbers for digital or remote work. There's no provision because they're using an old template. Even things like content creators, comedians, musicians. Look how many musicians, how many comedians, and these guys are making loads of money. So we need to understand the fact of how the economy has changed, transmogrified from what we used to know, and begin to bring this into, look at delivery men and Okada, all these, and even things like all these keke napep drive. There's no provision in the MBS thing. I mean, they're all over the place. These boys that do delivery, there are hundreds of thousands of them around the country. It's a big business. In COVID, it was during COVID that thing became a big business, that they started employing, and also, there was one guy who did go-karter and all of that. You know? So I did mine, agents or real estate, salesmen, recycling business. How many people are there? I used to own a recycling business. Before I got tired of the fields, I ran and left it for one of my boys. He's doing incredibly well today. Okay? Doing incredibly well. He went to Germany. Some of his customers, they gave him equipment worth over 400 million. Just take this to Nigeria, continue producing and sending to us. Now, rather than just what we used to do, we used to sort and wash. Now it chips them and bails them and sends them to Germany. It makes hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Recycling. In that one, the small one we started, we employed more than 50 women just to sit and sort. And they charge per bottle. Okay? So, these are new areas. Shortlets, Airbnb, these are new things. Cryptocurrency, fintech, these are things that were not taken into consideration. Even the airlines and PJ's business. Okay? Uber, Bolt, and all of that. Port, Steve Dawes. So what my conclusion was that we had about 93 million people employed in this country permanently. Yeah, bros, don't worry, I'll soon be done. 2 minutes. Okay, so that's that. Now, just some of my other evidences. This is the April World Bank report. April World Bank report. This is federal government spending as a percentage of GDP. This green is capital expenditure. This green. You see what the federal government capital spending as a percentage of others? This is personnel cost. This is overhead cost. This is other recurrent. And this is interest expense. I don't know, somewhere there. And then this is capital. But look at states. Compare the green for the state with the green for the federal. The spending is going on at the states. Some people are pursuing Tinubu up and down. When there's action going on in your state, get involved. Get involved. Look at the capital spending per state. So the argument must change. This one talks about nationwide fiscal position masks a growing fiscal dichotomy. From the same World Bank report, CAPEX, okay, as against overhead. I think this one just talks about federal versus state. This is federal, this is state. Look at that. CAPEX for state, CAPEX for federal. Okay, this one talks about our debt and the fact that, the debt tapered a little bit to 39.8%. Okay? This is Southeast. An infographic talks about the Southeast and their domestic debt. Professor Teriba mentioned Enugu. The guy seems to be the aggressive one in the Southeast, followed by Imo isn't doing too badly, Anambra too. But he's the only one that's borrowing now for infrastructure projects. And I think that they have a space to borrow more. The percentage of Nigeria debt that is held by federal is 93%. 93%. The states are holding only 7%. Because they managed to strike off most of their loans in 2024. But I think we're standing at an epoch where we can actually achieve that 10% growth. But it won't happen from federal alone. It will happen from state. Look at Southwest. Look at Southwest. Only Lagos. See, if you compare the figures in Southeast, you see some robustness here. Compare with Southwest, even though Lagos dwarfs everybody, see what's going on. Very little. Some states are holding, like my state, Ondo State, is sitting on 8 billion of domestic debt only. But the monthly take from Ondo State is about 25 billion monthly. So it can pay off all of this in 1 month. So the point is this, is it good treasury management for us to be holding cash? Even states should not be doing long-term infrastructure with recurrent cash, recurrent revenue. It's a mismatch. If you think about a solid infrastructure you want to do for your people, get money long-term and invest long-term in infrastructure. This is my thinking, So anyway. So this is to show, when I mentioned the productive value of the Naira, these are our exporters. Nestle, Dangote, Bua, Nigeria Breweries, Guinness, Cadbury, flour mills. But not only them, we also have NASCON. This one exports salt. NASCO, when I was in Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan, I kept saying NASCO all over the place. It's as if maybe it's a different NASCO, but I think it's the same logo. They may be bigger in Abidjan than in Nigeria. Anyway, Dufree, that's the Indomie people, Promasidor, Chi Limited, 7-Up, Friesland, USC, Right Food. I can't see those two. Then Gatco, Daily Needs, Emzo, Wemi Industries, Daraju, Colgate, African Kiniko, Aspira. So listen, Gongoni, look, I'm just saying, as a tribute, my own personal tribute to exporters in this country, to companies that are producing and pushing out. It's not an easy task. We don't talk about them. We're always just seeing foreign investor. The domestic people that are working, they need more respect and more recognition from everybody. Okay, so I think that's it. The future concerns. So what are our concerns? Okay, this is what I mean. Look, Nigeria is the second one here. Scale of informality. Nigeria's economy is at least 57% informal. Only after Zimbabwe. This is the cutoff mark. The average is 38.9 informality in Africa. That's Nigeria here. It's unacceptable. So we can't have, when you have informal economy too large, that means you cannot get your revenues in the way you should. Everything falls from there. I got this from AFDB. Okay, our financial systems are still, not sufficiently developed and must develop. So all these things like ratings, we must get it right. Our financing gap in Africa in general, look at it. On climate finance, we need 242. We don't have 213. We only have maybe 30. On structural transformation financing for infrastructure, we need 495. We can only find maybe about 90, so there's so much missing. So those are the things we need to take care of in the future. Okay? Equally, debt vulnerability, a lot is relying on, this one shows maturity on the right-hand side. And, you can look at the legend and be able to interpret this one. I think that's it. So I think in the long term, what we're looking at is how we can actually transform our economies. The opportunities are there waiting for us to take advantage of right now. We have to start thinking about our economy in a different manner altogether. And we also need to mind the communication that we put out about our economy, because the world is watching. This economy is certainly not all about the bad news. We have to give credence to those who are trying on a daily basis to make a difference and to do something, very fundamental about this economy. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tokwe Fashua. Please, let's put hands together once again for him. People from Ondo, Ekiti State, very intelligent set of people. If you leave Tokwe here, it will take us for the next 5 hours. It won't be tired. Thank you so much, Dr. Tokwe, for doing justice. I had thought we will have an opportunity for question and answer, but you just mentioned to me that he's on his way out, and I need him to meet the members of the press in having a chat with them. But while that is going on, let me recognize the presence of one of our speakers today, Ms. Chinwe Egwim, Chief Economist, First Bank of Nigeria Limited. Let's put hands together for Chinwe. Thank you, ma. Thank you. We also had join us in the course of the day, Mr. Adebayo Durodola, MD, Stenik, is one of our sponsors. Let's put hands together for Mr. Adebayo. Thank you. One of our vice presidents also joined us in the course of the day, Princess Funlayo Bakari Okewo, vice president here at the Chamber and the chairperson of the Trade Promotion Board. Thank you. So allow me to skip 1 or 2 sessions and bring up Dr. Muda Yusuf to have his session. The other sessions will be online. Please put your hands together for Dr. Muda Yusuf, founder, CEO, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. Please, can we display his, yes. Thank you, Doc.
How many minutes more? 20 minutes? The President of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Engineer Leye Kupolui, the Special Advisor to the President on Economic Affairs, Dr. Tokwe Fashua, President, Chartered Institute of Directors, Otumba Tunji Oyebanji, Past President LCCI, Mr. Gabriel Idahosa, Vice President and Chairman of the Trade Promotion Board, Princess Layo Bakari Okewo, my fellow speakers, and of course, Mr. Ayotunde Koka, Member of Council. It's great to see you again. Distinguished members of the LCCI. For me, this invitation is an invitation to come back home. This is homecoming for me because LCCI is a major part of my journey. It has been a major part of my journey, and I have no regrets at all. So I'm really very grateful for this invitation. I will be discussing about manufacturing industrial policy, and competitiveness. The presentation will be relating more to the realities on the ground. Because one of the sectors that have been struggling, and struggling very hard, is manufacturing. Because when you look at the variables they are dealing with, they're extremely very, very challenging variables. And if manufacturing investment is not competitive, the business, of course, will be at risk. That is why competitiveness is at the heart of the survival and sustainability of the Nigerian manufacturing sector. There is no doubt that we have made a lot of progress on the macroeconomic front. And the special advisor to the president alluded to that. But we still have a long way to go on the structural environment front. Of course, it will take time, because you can't fix power in 1 year or 2 years. You can't fix the ports in a year or two. You know, there's a whole lot of challenges. But of course, there is a role for the government, and there's a role for the private sector. So essentially, it's a partnership. So what I will do within the 20 minutes or so that I have is to go through the paper that I have quickly, and while the infographics will be on as I go through the presentation. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation once again to the leadership and management of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to participate in this important economic conversation. It's a special privilege to return to an institution I proudly regard as home. This is indeed an exciting homecoming for me. Today I'll be discussing Nigeria's industrial policy, the imperative of manufacturing competitiveness, and the focus shall be on why a coherent industrial policy remains fundamental to industrialization, why manufacturing competitiveness is indispensable for productivity, for investment, for exports, for employment, and for economic resilience, and how government and the private sector must work together to build a globally competitive manufacturing economy. And of course, I will conclude by highlighting the economic cost of inaction and why the urgency for reform has never been greater. The Nigerian industrial policy is arguably the country's most comprehensive industrial framework in decades, unlike earlier strategies that concentrated largely on incentives, on individual sectors. It integrates industrial incentives, infrastructure, energy, finance, technology, innovation, skills development, sustainability, institutional reforms within a single implementation architecture. The policy rightly recognizes that industrialization cannot be driven by isolated interventions. Competitive manufacturing depends on complementary reforms across multiple policy domains. It is therefore well aligned with Nigeria's Agenda 2050, the Nigerian National Development Plan, the opportunities presented by the African Continental Free Trade Area, and the global transition towards digital and green industrialization. The policy also correctly identifies many of the structural constraints that have undermined Nigeria's manufacturing sector for decades. These are challenges around electricity, high logistics costs, expensive industrial finance, infrastructure deficits, weak innovation systems, limited technology adoption, underdeveloped domestic value chains. It also emphasizes on MSME development, local value addition, industrial clusters, backward integration, skills development, and sustainability, which reflects a modern understanding of industrial competitiveness. These are significant strengths. However, the success of any industrial policy ultimately depends not on the quality of its design, but on the quality of its implementation. Because if you look at the Nigerian policy space, there are so many policies, many of them very fantastic, but many of them are just gathering dust on one shelf or the other. There have always been a major disconnect between what is happening at the policy level and what is happening in reality. So we need to bridge that gap. Industrial policy provides direction, but it is manufacturing competitiveness that delivers results. Around the world, government formulates industrial strategies, they offer incentives, and promote priority sectors. Yet, only a limited number of countries succeed in building a globally competitive manufacturing sector. The distinguishing factor is rarely the existence of industrial policy. Rather, it is the ability of firms to produce efficiently, to innovate continuously, to compete successfully in domestic and international markets. Competitiveness is therefore the bridge between policy ambition and economic transformation. This is very key. Manufacturing competitiveness is measured not by the number of factories established or incentives granted, but by the ability of firms to produce quality goods at competitive costs, to respond quickly to changing market conditions, to adopt new technologies, and to meet international standards and compete profitably over the long term. Competitive industries attract investment because they generate sustainable returns. Competitive firms expand because they continuously raise productivity. Competitive economies export because their products compete successfully on price, on quality, and reliability, as well as in innovation. The experience of successful industrial economies consistently supports this proposition. Countries that transformed their manufacturing sectors did not rely on protection alone. They invested in productivity, technology, skills, infrastructure, efficient institutions, and export capability. Their industrial policies were ultimately designed to improve competitiveness rather than protect inefficiency. As a country, we face the same kind of challenge. The country possesses substantial competitive advantages in a number of areas. We have a large domestic market. We have abundant natural resources. We have entrepreneurial private sector. We have an expanding digital capabilities, and we have a strategic location within the continent. Yet these advantages have not translated into comparable industrial performance. If you look at the GDP data, the Nigerian industrial sector or manufacturing sector just accounts for less than 10%. And it has been like that for so many years. And it has been like that because the structural challenges impeding manufacturing has not changed significantly over time. So that is why we have this major challenge about manufacturing competitiveness. The objective of industrial reform must therefore extend beyond expanding manufacturing capacity. It must systematically improve the competitiveness of Nigerian production. Competitiveness is not the outcome of a single policy intervention. It reflects the cumulative effect of production costs, productivity, innovation, value chain development, export capability, and institutional quality. These priorities can be organized within a coherent national competitiveness framework. Now, let me quickly look at what I regard as the pillars of Nigerian manufacturing competitiveness. If Nigeria is to emerge as one of Nigeria's leading as one of Africa's leading industrial economies, its manufacturing strategy should rest on 5 mutually reinforcing pillars. These are not theoretical constructs. They reflect the practical experience of economies that have successfully industrialized. Together, they provide a comprehensive framework for lowering production costs, raising productivity, strengthening industrial capability, and positioning Nigerian firms to compete successfully within Africa and global markets. The first pillar of manufacturing competitiveness is competitive production cost. Production cost in this economy is still very, very high. That is why if you look at our export data, manufacturing export is so small, possibly less than maybe 5 or even 3%. Because for you to export, you must be competitive. The best of our export in manufacturing is just around the West African sub-region. Industrial competitiveness begins with the economics of production. No manufacturing economy can achieve sustained competitiveness where firms face unreliable electricity, high logistics costs, expensive finance, that's the cost of credit, multiple regulatory agencies, and deficient infrastructure. Under such conditions, improvements within the individual firms are often overwhelmed by structural disadvantages beyond their control. Reducing the structural cost of doing business should therefore become the foremost objective of industrial policy. This requires reliable and competitively priced electricity, efficient transport corridors, modern ports, lower logistics costs, affordable long-term industrial finance, and predictable taxation and streamlined regulation. And talking about financing, if you look at the commercial, the financial markets currently, we are talking about interest rates over 30%. Because if the MPR is 26.5, just do a little markup on that. How many investments can survive with that kind of credit, with that kind of cost of credit? And now we have the development finance institutions, the BOI, Bank of Agriculture, and the rest of them, that are supposed to fill this gap, provide single-digit facility, and provide long-term funds. The challenge is how well are they doing that? Because for me, this is a case of market failure. And when we talk about market failure, what we are saying is that the market cannot fix everything. There is a place for market and there's a place for government intervention. Yes, the former CBN governor went overboard in all these intervention funds and all of that. But we cannot throw away the baby with the bathwater. There's still a window for government to provide sufficient intervention in development financing for agriculture, for manufacturing, for infrastructure, for real estate, and so on and so forth. Not all sectors can compete with telcos, with oil and gas people in the financial market, even with government. Government itself is borrowing at over 20%. So that has created a major dysfunctional financial system that is not sufficiently supporting the real sector of the economy. Only recently, the Bank of Industry advised those who have borrowed money from them that they were reviewing their interest rates. Because normally interest rates in BOI should be around 9, maximum 10%. But it was reviewed to about 15%. And businesses were requested that if you are not willing to comply, please come and liquidate the loan. Is it so easy to liquidate a loan that you have invested? Maybe in machineries and many other areas. This is the kind of dilemma we are facing. So we must strengthen our advocacy about strengthening development finance. It's very, very important. Not all sectors can be taking credit at market rates. It doesn't just work. The second pillar is productivity and innovation. I'm talking of pillar of manufacturing competitiveness. While competitive production costs are essential, long-term advantage ultimately depends on productivity. As manufacturing becomes increasingly technology-driven, firms compete less on labor costs and more on efficiency, innovation, digital capability, and continuous improvement. Nigeria cannot build a sustainable industrial future on low wages alone. We must compete through higher productivity, superior quality, faster innovation, and a sophisticated production system. Achieving this requires greater investment in research and development, stronger collaboration between the research institutions and industry, wider adoption of automation, digital manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. Equally important is embedding continuous improvement into everyday management and production processes. Tomorrow's industrial leaders will compete as much through knowledge, technology, and innovation as through physical capital. So those of us that are manufacturers also have a challenge to scale up our competitiveness. It is not just a government issue. That is the point that I'm making here. The third pillar is competitive value chains. Industrialization is not simply about establishing factories. It is about building integrated industrial ecosystems. Competitive manufacturing depends on efficient suppliers, logistics providers, warehousing, standards institutions, financial services, technology companies, research organizations, skilled professionals, and export infrastructure, operating as interconnected components of a productive value chain. So there's a lot of things that needs to work together to ensure that we have competitiveness. And those are the things that I've outlined. Nigeria already possesses abundant agricultural resources. We have significant mineral deposits. We have an expanding service sector and one of Africa's fastest growing digital economies. The strategic priority is to connect these assets more effectively so that greater value is created domestically before products enter regional and global markets. Every additional stage of domestic processing strengthens industrial capability, it expands employment, it increases export earnings, and reduces dependence on imported intermediate goods. Industrial ecosystems, not isolated factories, are the true engines of sustainable and sustained competitiveness. The fourth pillar is export competitiveness. Nigeria's large domestic market provides an opportunity and important foundation for industrial growth. But domestic demand alone cannot sustain long-term manufacturing expansion. Successful industrial economies produce for both domestic and international markets. Export competitiveness must therefore become central objective of our industrial policy. The African Continental Free Trade Area presents an unprecedented opportunity to expand manufactured exports, but preferential market access alone will not guarantee success. International markets reward firms that are consistently delivering competitive prices, superior quality, reliable supply, timely delivery, and compliance with global standards. These things are key when we talk about export competitiveness. Our aspiration should therefore be very clear. We manufacture in Nigeria, we should compete across Africa, and progressively integrate into the global value chains. The fifth pillar of manufacturing competitiveness is institutional quality. Those of us that interact with government institutions we'll be able to speak to the kind of frustrations that investors face when we need to interact with government, either for one approval or one licensing or the other. It can be very frustrating. If we don't have quality institutions, our manufacturing ecosystem will continue to struggle. Strong industries require strong institutions. Investors value policy consistency more than policy announcements, transparency more than administrative discretion, and efficient institutions more than generous incentives. Nigeria must therefore continue strengthening regulatory quality, customs administration, commercial dispute resolution, contract enforcement, public procurement, infrastructure governance, and property rights and policy coordination. The policy environment is very, very important because policy can make or mar businesses. And it's even worse for manufacturing because you are dealing with a sector where your assets are not very mobile, your assets are not liquid. Once you are stuck in it, you are stuck in it. So if you have a situation where policies are changing, then the business will be at risk. I mean, we have a Dangote $20 billion refinery. It's not something you can just uproot and say you want to relocate. It's not something you can say you want to get out of the business like you are in the stock market. Say, okay, this stock is not moving, you sell it, you move into another stock. Those are the challenges that manufacturers and real sector investors face. That is why it is important for the policy environment to be very supportive of entrepreneurs in those places. Effective institutions reduce uncertainty, they lower transaction costs, and strengthen investors' confidence. Weak institutions do precisely the opposite. Competitiveness flourishes where institutions consistently enable enterprise rather than constrain those enterprises. Taken together, these 5 pillars constitute more than an industrial policy framework. They provide national competitiveness strategy capable of transforming manufacturing into the principal engine of productivity, investment, exports, and inclusive growth. For the government has a role, because I know my time is gradually running, so I move faster now. Government has a role, and the private sector, of course, has a role. That is why we talk about a competitiveness compact for industrial transformation. The 5 pillars I mentioned provide a strategic framework for strengthening manufacturing competitiveness. Their success, however, depends on effective implementation by 2 principal actors, the government and the private sector. Industrial transformation is achieved when sound public policy and enterprise-level excellence reinforce one another. So government has the responsibility of creating conditions, the right conditions for enterprise. Government has a responsibility to ensure we have a stable macroeconomic environment, and we already have that. Luckily, at least the last 1 or 2 years has shown us that the macroeconomic environment has improved significantly. Then we need to reduce the structural cost of doing business, which is a major issue, and this is about factors that I've mentioned: electricity, roads, logistics, the ports, and so on. Then we need to also ensure that policies are consistent and there is regulatory certainty. So that the regulator doesn't say one thing today, they say another thing tomorrow, and they create all sorts of confusion for investors in the manufacturing sector. Then we need to have an appropriate industrial policy. What we have is good, at least on paper. The challenge is how to, translate it to ensure that we have the right kind of outcomes. Where competitive local capacity exists, public procurement should support Nigerian manufacturers through transparent value for money purchasing. Patronage of made in Nigerian products is extremely very important. We have been paying lip service to this. And that is why we are faced with a situation where Chinese products or Asian products are overrunning our markets. If you cannot control that, at least we can control what government is buying, either at the state level or at the federal government level. So procurement policy is a very important factor to support manufacturing competitiveness and to also support manufacturers to scale. Now, for the private sector, just as I said, the challenge is not only for government, it's also for the private sector. So what can we do as private sector investors? While government shapes the operating environment, competitiveness is ultimately created within firms. Competitive manufacturers distinguish themselves through relentless improvements in productivity, efficiency, quality, and innovation. We must therefore invest continuously. Manufacturers cannot compete with obsolete machinery, outdated production systems, or aging technology. Continuous investment in automation, digital manufacturing, advanced equipment, and process modernization must become a permanent strategic priority for us in the private sector. Global manufacturing leaders invest ahead of opportunity. They do not wait for a perfect economic condition. Secondly, we must pursue operational excellence. Competitiveness is built through disciplined execution, lean manufacturing, quality management, preventive maintenance, inventory optimization, energy efficiency, waste reduction, and continuous process improvement. This should become standard management practice across Nigerian industries. Then sustained productivity improves and generates durable competitive advantage. Then innovation also extends beyond research laboratories. It encompasses product development, production processes, digital technologies, business models, market, customer engagement, and organizational capacity. Companies that innovate consistently adapt faster. They create higher value products. They sustain long-term profitability. Innovation should therefore become a boardroom priority rather than a specialized technical function. Then, as industries, as manufacturing sector, we must also strengthen domestic value chains. Manufacturers should deepen local sourcing wherever commercially viable. Competitive localization strengthens supplier development. It reduces foreign exchange exposure. It improves supply chain resilience, and it increases domestic value addition. However, localization must be driven by quality, must be driven by reliability and cost competitiveness, not administrative compulsion. Sustainable localization occurs when Nigerian suppliers become internationally competitive. Then as manufacturers, we must also invest in human capital. Technology alone do not create competitiveness. Its value depends on the quality of the people who deploy it. Yes, machineries are good, but machineries cannot operate themselves, even if they are automated. Somebody must do something to automate it. So investment in human capital is good. We need quality engineers, technicians, artisans, data specialists, production managers. All of this will determine the future competitiveness of the Nigerian manufacturing sector as much as the factories themselves. So therefore, there must be a competitiveness compact. Industrial transformation succeeds when government and business perform complementary, not competing roles. Government cannot legislate productivity, while businesses cannot build national infrastructure. Government cannot innovate on behalf of firms, just as private sector cannot deliver macroeconomic stability or institutional certainty. Each of these segments of the economy have their distinct role. Government must lower structural business costs. Government must strengthen institutions and provide policy certainty. Businesses must raise productivity. They must accelerate innovation. They must invest continuously and pursue export competitiveness. These are very critical roles for the government, for the government and the private sector to do. When these responsibilities reinforce one another, competitiveness becomes cumulative. Investment expands, productivity rises, and exports grow, and industrialization accelerates. This is the essence of a national competitiveness compact. It is more than a framework for industrial policy. It is a framework for Nigeria's economic transformation. We need to collaborate a lot more. Collaboration is a powerful competitive strategy. Businesses should work together through industry associations just as like the Lagos Chamber of Commerce, shared infrastructure, joint logistics, common research centers, shared warehousing, collective export promotion. Such partnerships reduce costs, they strengthen bargaining power, and they enhance overall competitiveness. Government agencies also need to collaborate more to achieve the competitiveness objectives. The Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment has very little direct control over electricity, over energy, interest rates, import duties, exchange rate, port logistics, quality of roads, contract investments, etc. Yet, the minister is the Minister of Industry, and he doesn't have control over the critical variables that is affecting the Nigerian manufacturing sector. That is why, and it's also stated in the policy, there has to be a very strong framework of collaboration and interministerial relationships in order to be able to deliver the right outcomes for manufacturing. Because all the critical factors affecting manufacturers are not within the domain of the Ministry of Industry. So that is a major challenge that we deal with. Now, if you don't act fast, there is also a cost for not acting fast. So as I conclude, I need to say that manufacturing competitiveness is no longer an economic aspiration. It is an economic imperative. Technological disruption, supply chain management, geopolitical shifts, climate transition, emergence of new regional production networks are reshaping the global manufacturing landscape. The cost of failing to improve manufacturing competitiveness is profound. Without a competitive manufacturing sector, economic growth will remain below potential. Productive employment will continue to lag behind labor force expansion. Import dependence will persist. Pressure on foreign exchange will remain elevated, and industrial investment will increasingly migrate to more competitive destinations. The stakes are even higher in the context of African continental free trade area. Access to continental markets of more than 1 billion people presents an unprecedented opportunity, but market access alone does not confer competitive advantage. Countries that build productive and competitive manufacturing sectors will capture the largest share of regional trade. Those that do not will become increasingly attractive markets for goods produced elsewhere. That is the major risk we face as far as this AFCFTA is concerned. If you are not careful, we become a market destination rather than an investment destination. And that will not be good for what we desire. So Nigeria stands at an important moment in its economic development. The first phase of recent reforms was necessarily directed at restoring macroeconomic stability. While it is difficult, these reforms have laid a strong foundation for long-term growth, just as the economic advisor said. We need the macroeconomic stability as a very strong foundation, but we also need the superstructure to come on top of it. The next phase must be ambitious. Our priority should now be to convert macroeconomic stability into higher productivity, greater competitiveness, stronger industrialization, and broad-based prosperity. That transition will define Nigeria's economic trajectory in decades to come. I want to thank you very much for listening and for your attention. I hope I have not taken too much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Muda Yusuf. I know this is your area, and at least I should allow you to pour little from the wet depth of knowledge that you are an expertise that you have in this area. All right? I skipped the other time to bring up Dr. Muda Yusuf, the time for Professor Biodun Adedikwe. I'm told Prof is online now. Prof, can you confirm you are with us now?
Yes, fully with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. This is your time.
All right. So thank you so very much. Let me start by appreciating our President and Chairman of Council and other council members present and members of, access to internet can become an issue. So I will go through I call it my presentation in just 10 minutes maximum, doing what Ayoteriba did much earlier, but of course, making reference to some slides that I will share on the screen right now. Now, these slides, of course, will be available to all the attendees through the Secretariat after the event. So I will speak to just a few of the slides as I mentioned. So permit me therefore to turn off my video so that we can focus on the slides. And I'm starting from what I call the macro context. And I'm starting from what I call the macro context. And that is to recognize that the problems of developing countries are still common to them, but in varying degrees. And of course, they are the five I identified, I think about 2-3 years ago, and began to pay close attention to them: food deficit, energy deficit, manufacturing deficit, infrastructure deficit, and housing deficit. In fact, the last of them is where I'm in Abuja at this time at an international conference with people from all over the world talking about affordable housing in Africa. But like previous speakers said, I want to also put forward that the narrative about Nigeria is changing gradually. And why will I say that? Number one, there's improvement in food availability, but little progress on affordability and sustainability, which means we don't yet have sufficient volume that will drive down the prices of food items. Secondly, there's already energy transition. This connects to what the committee for this economic outlook want me to address, and that is the oil and gas sector. There is energy transition, especially off-grid, with intensifying solar adoption. Equally, there is oil production boost driven by new investment in oil and gas, the widening participation of local entities, and of course, a significant reduction in oil theft. Fourthly, under this, domestic refining of crude oil and solid minerals is intensifying. Number 5, manufacturing, interestingly, is dominated by foreign investors. And I made a reference here to a report by Manufacturers Association of Nigeria that 10 new members registered in one of the branches, I think Lagos, either Papa or so, in the first quarter of this year. But out of the 10 new members, 7 were foreign investors. So which means, as I've been saying in the last 18 months thereabout, that there's new manufacturing emerging in Nigeria. Equally, government revenue is expanding and being diversified. If we take a look at tax receipts of 21.6 trillion naira in the first half of this year, that says something about how we are progressing. Infrastructure, we're having more enduring concrete roads in reconstruction and renewal, the airport terminal buildings, rail network expansion, and of course, deep sea ports, about 5 of them in all. So now, within that context, the organizing committee of this said I should pay attention to 3 things. Primarily, the supply of crude to domestic refineries. Secondly, the pricing of refined petroleum products, which speaks to what you and I get at the pump head, and of course, what goes in terms of, diesel, jet fuel oil, and the rest of them. Then thirdly, the high energy costs in the Nigerian business environment. So what I've done here is first and foremost to bring to our attention, and also in dealing with global disruptions to business generally. Now, you see what is happening currently and the Middle East, that the conflict between US, Israel, Iran, okay, which began on the 28th of February this year. Now, the 2 central issues at the global stage as we speak today are geopolitics and the Middle East conflict. Now, when you experience such massive global disruption to business, the interpretation takes 2 forms. First, what is the nature of that disruption? And then what are the buffers that the country you are analyzing, has? Or maybe you are looking at your own organization. Now, the current disruption is about 4 commodities primarily, and that is dealing with energy fertilizer markets. Talk about crude oil, production and export, the export and refining of petroleum products, then LNG and fertilizer. Those are the 4 commodities affected by that conflict. And then buffer speaks to your external reserves vis-a-vis your monthly import bills, and then your external obligations for the year in question relative to your GDP on the one hand, and also relative to your external reserves. Now, in doing this, when this war broke out February 28, we looked at every country around the world and were able to pair them into 4. Those that had strong buffers and are also independent of the importation of those 4 commodities from the Middle East. Then those that had weak buffers, they were independent, which means they did not depend on the Middle East for the supply of those commodities. Then the third category, those with strong buffers, they were dependent. And that's why you find countries like South Korea, Japan, and a number of other East Asian countries. Then, of course, those with weak buffers and are dependent. That can really find Sri Lanka. So where was Nigeria when this war broke out? Happily for us, we were in the green quadrant. That is strong buffers in terms of our external reserves, not only in terms of the number, but in terms of how it relates to our monthly import bill. I will show you that shortly. And then how that also relates to our maturing external obligations in 2026. And that's where there's a big difference between Nigeria and Egypt, and also Nigeria and South Africa. Okay? So now, given this, we now said, how do we move from here? How come Nigeria was not badly affected by this conflict? And of course, previous speakers on this platform this morning had made reference to that. If I remember clearly, Dr. Tereba mentioned this, and I just smiled and said, well, that means our notes actually will cross anyway. Number one is, Nigeria began reforms since May 2023, and that was a kind of saving grace. Secondly, we have also intensified domestic refining of crude oil and also solid minerals. All right. There's also growing supply of fertilizers to global markets coming out of Nigeria, and currently also expansion of capacity, which of course is projected to make Nigeria a major supplier of fertilizers to the global market by year 2028. That's in another 2 years. Strong external reserves, and of course, stable and appreciating currency in all market segments. Of course, policy guidance from Central Bank Governor about 2 months ago, when he made a statement that all the indices and what we see today about the Nigerian economy point to one direction, that there will be no devaluation of the currency the rest of this year. All right, we call that policy guidance in central and reserve banking. And of course, positive business confidence, PMI, has constantly been above 50 points. So now, given all of this, how did countries around the world respond? Because I will take from some of this in my recommendation shortly. Now, how did countries all around the world respond to this conflict? And there were 9 categories of responses we were able to derive. Number one, some countries introduced fuel subsidies and tax cuts. Some introduced price controls of refined petroleum products. Some actually went for demand reduction. And then some also looked at their strategic reserve and made adjustments, which means it's not only about today, but also about tomorrow. Then some provided targeted assistance to the most vulnerable businesses and households. And then in some others, there were supply side actions. In some, they intensified price monitoring. And then some also pursued alternative trade routes. And of course, finally, and this was common across most of the countries, establishment of an emergency crisis committee to address this particular issue. So how are the oil market fared in Nigeria? I put these 2 slides showing the end of 2025, how our economy looked like, and then as at yesterday evening, what did this economy look like? I mentioned earlier, appreciating currency. And the official market as at end of yesterday Naira had appreciated by 3.81%. And the parallel market, it had appreciated by 4.93%, which means the exchange value of the Naira had not only been stable, but we have seen appreciation since the beginning of this year. Now, I won't speak much about this because other speakers had addressed them, but not also to lose sight of one of the things that Dr. Tereba mentioned earlier, and that is the state of the stock market, but I will leave it there. Now, focusing on the oil sector, if we look at the data from 2014 up until date, which is what I show on this chart here, they're looking specifically at post-COVID, because economies around the world have behaved differently post-COVID than they did up until 2019 and then entering to 2020, the COVID year. So if we look at the performance of the oil sector in terms of crude oil prices for Nigeria now coming home, not globally, except in 2024, the average price of Nigerian crude, as reported by the Central Bank of Nigeria, the data for this came from CBN, okay, was above the budget assumption in each of those years. That's 2022, 2023, 2025, and of course, so far in 2026 as well. Now, if we look at production and export, also reported, and I'm sure one of our speakers must have mentioned this earlier, production was at 6-year high in June 2026, averaging 1.56 million barrels per day in June, with added condensing of about 200,000 barrels per day, bringing output to 1.76 million barrels per day as of June this year. So, with case production has started expanding. You can see that on this chart. From 2022 till date, production has been expanding in Nigeria. Now, coming to the oil market, two major news about Nigeria were out yesterday. I picked this from the platform of oil.com. Okay, in the newsletter issued yesterday, which I saw this morning, they reported Nigerian output soars to 6-year high, and I just copied it and pasted here. So Nigeria's upstream regulator NUPRC stated that the African country's crude oil production soared to its highest level since April 2020. That's a 6-year, interval. Now, the second news put out yesterday is with respect to what Nigeria did to Shell. Now, Shell gets Nigeria oil tax relief, in which case Nigeria has granted UK-based energy major Shell a production-linked tax credit. And that's important because in my recommendations in a few minutes, I'll be talking about the kind of subsidy, where should it go? And then if we're going to give incentives, what should we focus on? So now, still on the oil market, what are the issues for us today? The first critical one for me is crude supply to domestic refineries. But incidentally, what we hear as claimed by Dangote Petroleum Refinery is that what is supplied to it is at a premium. I will come to that later. Okay? But question for us is, if production locally has been expanding, as I just mentioned, using data that we got from CBN website, has the volume supplied to domestic refineries been increasing along at the same rate? That's a question to ponder. Then talking about pricing of refined products, a very interesting area indeed. Number one, if you look at domestic gross refining margins, they are very high. And why is that so? If you take the difference between the international price of crude oil and compare with what I described here as the implied, price of a barrel of crude oil, that gives that price internationally observed today compared to $124 per barrel. Now, as of this morning, while Dr. Tereba was speaking, I checked out the price of Brent. Brent as at 10, in fact, just before we started the meeting, because I joined before 11 a.m. $85.31 was the Brent price as at 10:50 a.m. this morning. Then I also checked about the same time. What is the price of burning light? That one was not available. But as of yesterday, the price of Brass River crude type for Nigeria was $83.29 per barrel. Kwaibo, that's Mobil producing, $83.77 per barrel. So if you want to now look at the gross refining margin, the difference between the price per barrel of crude compared to this will give you an idea of how high that margin is. Then, of course, NNPC pricing benchmark for me is out of date. It was set in September 2024 based on an assumed Brent price of $81 per barrel, FX rate of 1.637. By the way, you can see the Naira has appreciated since then. In fact, appreciation of the Naira began in November 2024. And of course, PMS ex-depot price of 898.78 Naira per liter. Those were the assumptions and the price indicated by the benchmark of NNPC. So if you now want to compare that with today's prices, that is time imbalance, because you are looking at benchmark set in September 2024, and we are now in July 2026. So that is time imbalance. You want to make a comparison. Now, pump head prices are sticking downwards, which we all know. It is very easy for domestic refiners and marketers to point to prices going up in international oil markets and increase the pump head price of refined petroleum products. But when the price of crude oil starts to drop, they don't reflect that, and they argue that we still have old stock, in the stock. But eventually, they hardly will do that in any case, because when you challenge them for that, they point to cost of doing business in Nigeria. Now, also, there is no doubt that we have monopoly power in the midstream, that's refining. And of course, there's a seeming higher operating cost and taxes in domestic refining refining as claimed by those operators. What is the implication? That will mean high energy costs to businesses and households, and that will impact the cost of logistics, because we burn more than 35% of the fuel we consume on the roads. And of course, that has pass-through effect to inflation. I will skip this outlook and come to the final part. Now, in June 2004, that's 22 years ago, I was invited to speak at a conference in London, and I was given the topic, the impact of oil on economic policy in Nigeria since independence, which meant they wanted me to look at from 1960 up on the 2004. That's a span of 44 years. What had been the impact of oil on economic policy in Nigeria? Now, at the end of that paper, I made some recommendations, which I put before us today, okay? I was actually the first speaker. That was on the 16th of June 2004. I said Nigeria at that time should sell the refineries, that's government-owned refineries, as they are. Okay, secondly, supply crude for domestic consumption at less than international price. That's speaking about subsidy for production. And then index the pump head prices of refined products to domestic income and cost of living. Now, that's why I showed you 9 things that countries around the world did in response to the impact of the conflict in the Middle East on refined products and crude oil. Now, still talking about what I said 22 years ago, use oil revenue to revamp agriculture and then strengthen manufacturing through tax incentives and infrastructure renewal. Then embrace accountability and good corporate governance principles. These things were said on the 16th of June 2004 in London at a conference sponsored by the UK government through ODI. All right? Now, we are here today. What do we recommend our government should do? Now, sell the government-owned refineries as they are. And in fact, a recent presentation made by Dan Dikunle, he said, a refinery that does not refine is not an asset. It is a liability. So why should we continue putting money in liability instead of realizing the asset and putting the money into better use? But of course, in getting that also into place, we must focus on engendering competition in the midstream sector. Currently, we have a major producer who dominates refining of crude oil in Nigeria. That doesn't allow for competition. I'm not the one that supports competition coming from importation of refined products. I would rather support other refineries that are set up in Nigeria and they can compete with DPR. Okay. Secondly, supply crude for domestic refining at less than international price. What does that mean? It means we will subsidize production, not consumption. But if we do that deliberately as a policy choice, then we can demand that this should reflect at the pump head, which means the subsidy should not be lost within the value chain. It must get to the pump head so that citizens and consumers of this can benefit from what government is doing. Thirdly, we need to also index the pump head prices of refined products to domestic income and cost of living. Again, some of the countries I mentioned earlier on, in fact, maybe before this slide deck is shared with attendees, I will bring in a slide that I used and mentioned specific countries that used any of those policy tools, okay? Some of them introduced stricter monitoring and, of course, adjustments and enforcement in order to ensure that what the government intends in terms of policy actually reflects at the pump head. Number 4, we need to use oil revenue to revive agriculture. We've thought about this for years, calling it the disconnect between the oil economy and the non-oil economy. And I'm suggesting here, is it possible to index a defined percentage of oil earnings to food security, which is a 4-component thing: food availability, food affordability, of course, the quality of the food, and then we talk about sustainability. Number 5, sustain tax incentives for enhanced crude output, as I reported in my share now, but also extend this to critical manufacturing sectors, which incidentally was what Dr. Ibuda Yusuf just spoke to. And of course, finally, all stakeholders, and it's based on what I've seen in that sector since I've been a part of ONG Nigeria in 1978 up until date. It's not transparency only at government, even the private sector, the operators within that space. We need transparency, we need accountability, we need good corporate governance, and we must be laser focused on policy execution. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I promise not to take much of our time. That essentially is my message to this conversation. So over to you, the MC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Adedipe, for that session. Dr. Sonny, I'm sure we have, I saw her here, our next speaker. I don't know if she's still in the house. Ms. Chinwe. Please. Okay. Please, Madara, is it that Madara or Dr. Sonny, please? If Chinwe is still around. Shisara, please let me get Madara or Dr. Sonny. All right. Do we have Mr. Oluwatobi Olafaju in house? Okay, you are here. Okay, let's have Mr. Oluwatobi Olafaju as he comes to make his presentation. Please, let's put our hands together for him.
All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Mr. President and members of council. I'm so honored to be here this afternoon to speak to us briefly about the impact evaluation a 6-month impact evaluation on the Nigerian tax reforms. As we're all aware that January 2026 was when we ushered in new tax laws in Nigeria. My name is Oluwatobi Olafaju. I work with Fovis Mazars. I'm a senior manager in the Tax and Regulatory Services Unit. I'm speaking today on behalf of Wabia Ojike, who is the country leader of Fovis Mazars. He was unable to be here physically, and that's why I'm here. Okay, I'll just go right in as quick as possible so that we don't waste too much time. Like I said, 1st of January 2026, we had new set of tax laws that were introduced in Nigeria. And those tax laws were not just paperwork. There were significant changes that now impact businesses in Nigeria, impacts individuals. Every one of us in this room are one way or the other impacted by this regime. What had happened from the first day was that 4 new laws were signed into law where we had a lot of all of our fragmented tax laws brought into one bucket. And then we had 4 legislations. I wouldn't talk much about all of these legislations one after the other, as I'm here to really speak about the impact of these legislations. Okay, so first things, what happened on the first day when these laws were passed? First things first was that for individuals, we saw a significant change in how individual taxations were being computed. One major thing that was addressed was that we needed to ensure that for lower income earners, taxes to be paid should be significantly reduced. So the impact on majority of persons is that the first 800,000 naira, which a lot of people considered as being low, were tax-free. And what that meant was that for individuals, it would have increased your disposable income. So what should have been taxed before has now been taken out of the bucket and not taxed. Another significant thing that changed from the first day was identification of small companies. Before the change in the tax law, small companies were companies that had turnover below 25 million naira. And at that time, it was practically insignificant because practically anybody who was doing any business would have hit 25 million naira. And so it made the structure a bit imbalanced. So now what the law did was to say, okay, small companies should be companies with turnover of less than 100 million naira and turnover less than 25 million naira. So what that did to the economy was that a lot of small and micro businesses who should majorly focus on doing their business now has the time to focus on their businesses, right? Then for corporates and for foreign investors, as the case may be, whilst in the old law, there were a lot of fragmented taxes to be paid. You know, you pay CIT, pay education tax, pay this levy and all of that, depending on the sector where you operated. What the new tax law tried to do was to say, look, we would bring all of these taxes into one bucket, right? Tax it at 4%. And then in addition to that, where you're a multinational company and you're getting so much from the economy, maybe your turnover is above 50 billion naira, or you're a member of a group where your group turnover is above 750 million euros, your minimum effective tax that you will contribute into the Nigerian economy shouldn't be less than 15%. And these were changes that has sort of impacted our economy, which we will discuss shortly. And then tax administration. Tax administration has significantly changed in Nigeria. One key thing that everyone will see visibly is that what we know as FIRS is now NRS, right? And a lot is really happening. In fact, these changes have started happening since 2025, right? And then I would take my time to discuss all of that going forward. Okay, so in evaluating the impact on the Nigerian economy, there are 5 key areas I want to talk about, and those are what you see on the slides. First is revenue mobilization. The question here is, are tax collections growing, and is the growth non-oil, and is this non-oil growth durable? The next is fiscal federalism. What do we have collectively? and how are they being shared across all the different levels of government. Macroeconomic stability. How has this tax reform impacted inflation? How has it impacted the naira? How has it impacted our foreign reserve? What is the growth? And has it created investors' confidence? Well, we will discuss this shortly. Then the business climate. What has this tax reform done to the business environment? Has it sort of made business, has it sort of improved our ease of doing business in Nigeria, or has it worsened it? And finally, and very important, is the households. Remember, I started by talking about the personal income tax. So for households, how has this impacted the households? Is there a significant improvement in the cost of living? Is there a significant improvement in the standard of living for households? All right, so for revenue mobilization, one thing that we need to know for certain is that a lot of revenue has been generated by the tax reforms. That is standard. And one of the major things that you would see here is that from January to June 2026, NRS has collected a whopping 21.6 trillion naira. This amount is already higher than what was collected in 2024, and about 90% of what was collected in 2025. So you can see that this is significant. If you look at the growth for corresponding period in 2025, that is January to June 2025, what we have today is 45% higher than that. 76% of these collections are non-oil, right? And so that means a lot of improvements. And then as we stand today, our tax to GDP ratio is 13%, right? The target from the reforms was 18%. And from January to date, we're already at 30%. So it means that these reforms are doing a lot in terms of revenue increase for the government. For tax to be very efficient, one key thing is administration. And in terms of administration, the NRS are taking a very bold step to introduce what we call Ref 360, and they call it Tax Administration 3.0. This administration moves us from what we used to know as, in the past, as Tax Promax. Our tax filing systems in the past were done through Tax Promax. Tax Promax had a bit of its own hiccups here and there, and then all of these were to be changed by Ref 360. A lot of critics came out to say, I mean, why create a Ref 360 when you can just modify Tax Promax? I personally think Ref 360 is the way to go. Now, one major thing that Ref 360 does is it has now created a one-door platform for tax administration in Nigeria. Everything you need to do for tax administration as a company is done through Ref 360. You will do registration, you will file your tax, you will make payments, you would apply and obtain your tax clearance certificate, and you will do a lot of things. Now, it has removed all of the fragmentation that we experienced in Tax Promax, because for Tax Promax, you couldn't do registration. You couldn't amend a few things in Tax Promax. You couldn't create an assessment where you wanted to do. So if we found out that taxpayers were spending a lot of times traveling to tax office to get very little things done, right? Ref 360 has corrected that. As we stand today, over 600,000 taxpayers have been onboarded on Tax Promax. And what the NRS did was to make this a very seamless process. All that was done was just move your login details from Tax Promax and apply that same login details on Ref 360, and then you're migrated. A very seamless process. Another interesting thing that I personally like about Tax Promax is that I don't need to file my tax return using a web form. I can file my tax return using an Excel sheet. So it gives me the opportunity to accurately report my information, because the web platform has been pre-modified, and then there's little to how much I can edit on it. So Tax Promax, like I said, Ref 360, like I said, is also a single sign-on login where tax ID can be auto-generated using your CAC portal, or as an individual using your personal identification for that. All right, next off that we want to see is the fiscal federation. From the fiscal side, how has the tax reforms impacted the economy? We see here that 38.6% growth rate, right, in terms of distributions. From January to May 2026, the FAC distributions stood at 10.45 trillion naira. What this means is that every single sector of the economy got higher than what they got in the previous year. When you compare reports from May 2025 to May 2026, we see an increase of about 38.6%. We've also seen different states draw about 1.28 trillion naira from VAT alone. This is also based on significant changes that occurred for VAT. Now, for VAT, the way the new regulation expects VAT to be submitted is to ensure that companies or states are getting their VAT based on where value is being derived, right? And so what we're seeing now is that for VAT alone, states have been able to pull a whopping 1.2 trillion naira, right? And there have been a lot of distributions in that regard. Macro stability. A lot of the speakers have talked about this in terms of macro stability. What we've seen is inflation rates. From December 2025 up until February, March, thereabouts, we saw inflation rates stabilize, right? But one key thing that affected, that you could see on the infographic here, that affected the spike was majorly an external factor. And this has nothing to do with the tax reforms. The external factor being the unrest in the Middle East, where there was a lot of shock and affected oil prices. And how that affected the Nigerian economy was because Nigeria is heavily dependent on oil. And so a slight increase in fuel price affects our inflation, and that's why we see this particular spike in inflation rate. But notwithstanding, I mean, analysts have confidently said that our inflation numbers will stabilize around 15.8%, I mean, after the shock and all of that. And we're beginning to see all of those things taking shape. Then for macro stability, as we stand today, year on year, our real GDP is about 3.8%. The Naira, like we've said severally during other speakers have said today, has stabilized. Interestingly, this is the first time in a very long time that we see Naira stay strong and stay very stabilized. And I mean, one of the speakers spoke where he was saying that the real value of the Naira stands about 1,100 Naira to $1. And that's really significant because if you look at what's going on in the global market, right, something that I try to monitor on a daily basis, and which I did, you would see a very huge strength in the Naira. And if we continue on this trajectory, I mean, together with all of the other reforms that had happened, I think we can do around that 1,100 before the end of the year. Our external reserves are significantly improved also. I mean, we're at an all-time high over 17 years. I mean, a 17-year high, rather, of 49.6 billion naira. Our capital importation has also increased. We've seen capital importation of about 10.36 billion naira, right, up 84% year on year, right? And this gets a lot of attributes to the tax reforms, right? Because what this means now is that, one, our capital market has improved. So we are seeing a lot of investors coming into the country. But a strong caveat here is that the inflows we're seeing into the country are majorly inflows for short-term investments. We've not really seen a strong impact of the tax reforms on FDIs. So what we're saying is investors are coming in, sort of borrowing the government through treasury bills, bonds, and the like. We've not really seen real investments where foreign investors are now coming in to build in the economy, directly impacted by the tax reforms. For me personally, I think that 6 months is still a bit too early to see all of these things play out, right? So over time, when we're able to build investors' confidence, we will then be able to see more of FDI directly attributable to these tax reforms. We've seen our S&P rating upgraded to B in May 2026, right? Also citing reforms. We're seeing that, globally, they can say that the Nigerian economy is beginning to take a lot of shape, right? And then our monetary policy rate, 26.5% after a 50 basis point cut, right? And PMI, interestingly, above 50%. This means that businesses are doing very well. Businesses are reporting growth because the average benchmark where you would then interpret that businesses are doing below or businesses are reporting losses or businesses are reporting a decline is where we're below 50%. And we stand significantly above 50% today at 54.1%. So it means that despite the reforms, despite the changes, businesses are reporting growth, and that's a good thing. And this can also be attributed to the tax reforms because we see that companies are no longer having to bother themselves about the hassles of duplicity of tax, multiple taxation, and all those things. Companies can focus more on doing business. So as a company, you focus on doing business, and then what you get to pay as your tax can almost be clearly determined, right? For the business climate, I would rush through this part. Where the reform is paying, one of the key things for businesses and in terms of cash flow, we see input VAT recoverability. This is highly significant. Companies can now claim input VAT, right, on assets and services, unlike what we used to experience before where you could only claim input VAT on your direct production or direct goods that you sell. Development levy at 4% has sort of removed all the multiple taxes, like I said, that companies had to pay. Small companies definition, I had also spoken about that. Another important thing that we also see from the tax reforms is trying to remove a lot of statutory bans on, try to get a lot of statutory bans on roadblocks, cash demands, and all of that. One of the speakers here said earlier, during the time of, I think the special advisor, during the time of the reforms, where a particular company in Port Harcourt had to bring out over 100 receipts for different taxes and levies that were paid. The tax reforms is working strongly to ensure that across all states, across all regions, your tax liabilities can almost be predictable as a business owner. And then finally, withholding tax relief for small suppliers, right? So easing working capital along the supply chain. What this means is that for small suppliers, withholding tax need not be deducted from your supplies when you make supply. And then invariably, it increases your cash flow, increases your working capital, and then you can do business. Where it's costing for business, one of the key things that I'd like us to discuss here is defaults for penalties. Penalties have significantly been increased, and also CGT rates has also been increased. Penalties, which used to be 25 million naira in the first month of failure, has gone up to 100 million naira. And 5,000 naira for subsequent months has gone up to 50,000 naira subsequently. CGT, which used to be 10%, right, but calculated differently, has gone up to 30%, right? But the advantage here is that you could also take out whatever loss that is attributable to that asset that you're disposing. Then For households, this is the last lens at which we are reviewing the reforms. For household, what we see is we can see on paper a lot of promises, but the impact, has it really been felt? What has the law delivered? Minimum wage earners, like I said, and income, taxable incomes up to 800,000 naira tax-free. 98% of workers would, from January to date, have either paid the same amount of taxes they've paid under the old regime or slightly lesser than what they used to pay, right? That means more disposable income. Rent relief, significant because the consideration is to ensure that one of the major burdens on household, which is rental income, has been considered in the reforms. I personally criticize this because a rent relief of up to 500,000 naira really would not do so much, right? But if we take out Lagos State from this equation and we try to focus on all other parts of the economy, all other states in Nigeria, I think this would also mean a lot in terms of what individuals would get as reliefs and how much they would have as their net take home. Then another significant thing that the law had delivered is VAT. We now see 0% VAT on food, healthcare, education, transport, and power. These are major expenditures to every household, right? And so where VAT stands at 0% for all of these major things, it also improves the standard of living. Like I said, these are the promises that the law has delivered. Food inflation has dropped from 24.6% to 17% year on year, right? But the truth is, as all of these things been felt, can we say that this impact has actually been felt on household? Personally, and my own opinion, I think the answer is no, right? And why is that? Because prices are still rising. We still see that the tax reforms alone is not enough to cushion the effect on households, right? Prices are rising, disinflation lower the pace of the pain, but it does not reverse a 3-year loss of purchasing power. All of the impacts that we see on households today were things that were existing even before the tax reforms. So in 6 months, it is almost impossible to feel a total reversal of all of these things. Like I said before, 6 months is still too short to be able to fully assess the impact of the tax reforms. But over time, we would get to see that these reforms would impact and improve on the standard of living of a lot of Nigerians. Another key areas where this has not been felt is PAYE reforms. You know, for payee, a lot of people who are under the payee scheme are salary earners, right? What is the percentage of individuals under the salary scheme compared to the percentage of individuals in the informal sector? I think we have a larger number of people in the informal sector than we have in the salary and the PAYE scheme. So you would not feel that impact yet because a lot of people in the informal sector are not even under the payee scheme to start with. So that impact is not felt, right? Nothing has really changed in that regard. So, and majorly, the reforms, like I said here, is legitimately depends on what government do with the money. A lot of people ask this question, and as a tax professional, I get to answer this question every single time. Like I walk up to my clients and try to hound them. Oga, it's almost for 30th of June, file your returns. And the guy asks me, how much am I to pay? I tell him, Oga, you have to pay 100 million naira. And the guy looks at his bank account and like, 100 million naira can go a long way in my business. What is government even doing with this money is the first question. And then I'm scratching my head. just pay your tax. I don't know what government is doing with the money. So one of the key areas here is to ensure that the reforms are built such that there is that transparency between taxpayers and government. Where the transparency is felt, I think that more taxpayers will be happy to pay their taxes. Okay, moving forward, this is a summary of the scorecard, right, from where we are, based on the lenses that we have looked. For revenue mobilization, it is no-brainer. The tax reform has increased revenue for government. So in that area, the status right now is strong, and it is still growing. We see government revenue growing aggressively. Fiscal federalism, we've seen more distributions go to the different levels of government. State governments are getting more, local governments are getting more. Everybody is getting more because the top line is growing. It's also strong. Macro stability is on track because we're seeing that inflation is stabilizing despite the oil shock. And then we're seeing that the Naira is also stabilizing. And then our foreign reserve is at a 17-year high. Business climate is mixed, right? Mixed in the sense that there are recurring burdens. Businesses is not just all about paying taxes. There are so many other factors that talks about growth in terms of business. And then for household, we really need to watch that space very well because the impact has not yet been felt. For tax administration, Rev 360 is just less than 3 months old, so we cannot really assess what the Rev 360 has done. But trust me, we'll watch that space, and I can tell you, if we're coming back here in a year's time, we'll be able to assess that. And I personally think the status at that time would be strong. All right, so what do we expect in the next, what do we expect to see in the second half of the year as I conclude? First, one of the things that tax reforms has introduced to business is the introduction of e-invoicing, where companies are expected to plug their ERP into the NRS merchant buyer solution. What this means is that before any company would issue an invoice to its customers, that invoice must be approved by the NRS. It must be stamped by the NRS. So e-invoicing, as we speak today, has been made mandatory for larger companies with turnover of about 5 billion naira and above. And we expect to see in the remaining parts of the year other businesses being plugged into e-invoicing. Rev 360, right? We want to see the platform improve. At the time when it started, when it came on board, there were a lot of teething problems, there were a lot of gaps, and there were a lot of complaints. So we want to see improvements in the second half of the year for Rev 360, considering that the majority of companies in Nigeria operating in January to December year end have filed their tax returns in June. So what is going to be happening on Rev 360 is there's going to be less volume on that platform, and then it gives the tax authorities more opportunity to improve on areas that were observed during the June filings. For the tax revenue target for the year, 40.7 trillion naira was set as the target by NRS. As we speak, a significant portion of that amount has been achieved. So as we stand now, to achieve that target, there's a 19.1 trillion naira question. How does NRS intend to fill up the tax collection before December with 19.1 trillion naira? Also considering that majority of companies have filed their returns in June, which is the period where NRS usually records significantly higher inflows in terms of their revenue generation. We would also watch that space. For the monetary hands-off, we're looking at the MPR alongside our inflation, and then we want to ensure that this just continues to move steadily all through the year. For the tax filing, FY 2026 returns would be due in June 2027. What this means is that By that time, we would have experienced a full 1 year where companies have done businesses based on the new tax regulations. What it means is that company would have done all of their transactions, done all of their pricings based on the new tax law. And then this will be filed in 2026. We want to see significant impact in that space in terms of revenue generation and the level of compliance going forward from that. And then for subnationals, what we want to see is that we want to see more states adopt the single harmonized levy schedule. So there is an harmonized tax regulations that all states have started to plug into, such that it makes tax administration very, very uniformed across all states in Nigeria. A few states have plugged into it. So we want to see that happen going forward. I think that will be all for me for now. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Oluwatobi. All right. We will skip the panel session, as I've been told. As we can see, most of our panelists spoke to us via virtually, so we'll skip that and bring up the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry for our closing thoughts. Please put your hands together for Dr. Chinyere Almona.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. You're sounding hungry. Good afternoon. So this mid-year economic review and outlook conference really reflects the Chamber's tradition for evidence-based policy advocacy and private sector engagement. And I'm glad that that's what we've done today. As we bring this session to a close, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here for this length of time. It just demonstrates your commitment to the nation's economy and the advancement that we all want to see. The presentations that we've had today, the discussions, they've really just reaffirmed the importance of constructive dialogue and the benefit we get when we can engage with the public sector. So the public-private sector dialogue is always very important because then we get to know what is happening, they get to know how we are feeling about the things that they are doing, and it makes it easier. In the first half, we've also gone through a lot of policy reforms, and from the discussions and presentations that we've seen, it's clear that as we go into the second half of the year, we'll begin to see some benefits, some advantages from all the suffering, because the economic reforms that we've experienced, they've been quite painful for Nigerians, really. But we are seeing that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that in the second half, we'll begin to see things shape out within the landscape. And so our discussions today have really underscored the need for that consolidated reform. And we are saying to government, please keep going in that direction, because one of the things that we fear is policy somersaults or a change in direction or a derailment of reforms where we start something, it's painful and we're hoping to see the benefit, and then something changes. So we're hoping that there'll be some level of or greater measure of policy consistency and institutional efficiency as we go into the second half. So I want to say thank you all for being here. I want to thank my elders, the past presidents, the ESCO members, council members who are here. On behalf of the presidents, I also want to say thank you to the speakers, Dr. Muda, who is here, and all the speakers that have spoken online. I want to say thank you to all of them. But just mainly to say thank you to you all, because if you were not here and we had great speakers, there will still be no event. So I want to say thank you to everyone and wish you a very good rest of the day. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Madam DG. All right, on that note, we'd like to officially call this a close. Please, let's be upstanding as we take the national anthem for a close.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians old and proud to serve our sovereign motherland.
Thank you so much.